Morning, Chris. How are you?
Hey, morning, Rob. Doing well, doing well. Thanks for having me.
So, how long did you grow up in California, or did you kind of your work just take you there?
No, work actually just brought me out here. So I was born in Seattle, lived there until I was about a teenager, and then my parents moved us out to Salt Lake City.
And so your work has taken you there to LA because you're right in LA now. You're like in full in LA.
Yep, right in the heart of it.
I was just looking over your resume and what an interesting career you had. And I can't remember when you attended my programming course, but it must have been, like 15 or 14 or 16 or something there. Do you remember for
Yeah.
sure?
Yeah, I think it was either 2014 or 2015. It was very early after I'd gotten out of the military. And it just, when I saw that opportunity pop up, I was actually a strength coach at well, I was a CrossFit coach. Let's be specific. I was a CrossFit coach at the time. And when the opportunity came up to come learn from you, that was one of those rare opportunities. I'm like, I can't let this one pass by. So I did what I did to jump on it and go learn from you.
Yeah, well, because you went back to Salt Lake, and I remember, was your gym in Park City or was it right in Salt Lake? Because you started your own facility down.
I did, yeah. So that one was right in Salt Lake. It was actually right in the middle of the valley. So if you looked at north and south, it was right there in South Salt Lake. So, and it was right off the I-15 freeway. So, people who are going to work or coming back from work, I mean, the location was great. I wished I could have gone to Park City. Not gonna lie, I wish I could have afforded that kind of rent up there. But where we were actually worked out really well for us.
Did COVID take your gym from you?
A couple things took my gym. So I was working with my brother, and we kind of had a bit of a falling out. I broke that cardinal rule of never go into business with family, and unfortunately, he and I had a bit of a falling out, and that stemmed from trying to open up a second location here in California. We took the risk. We decided that, okay, let's give it a shot. Let's see if we can expand. And the one out here in California struggled. We never could break even. And the one in Salt Lake there was kind of boosting it up. And then over time, we decided to shut the one here in California down. And then the one in Utah just kind of struggled from there. And then COVID finally took it from us.
Could you take me back because you were working with the Utah rugby team. I saw that, and I played a little bit of rugby in college. What an interesting sport! Kind of this mix of football and soccer,
Hmm.
and with the endurance stuff. And you worked with them for, was it a club team? Probably a club team, right? I know it's not an NCAA, right?
Yeah, they called it a club team, yes, but they did have scholarships available. So it was kind
Oh,
of one of
really?
those, yeah, it was a few. It was like four or five, so it wasn't a lot of scholarships, but there was some availability there. And I think most of that was from boosters and donors and things like that. But we had some really excellent players. Utah, because of the Mormon influence, rugby's
Just the
incredible.
Tongan guys in there, right?
Exactly. You
Yeah,
get a lot of
yeah.
Polynesians, you get people who honestly probably could have played for the All Blacks being in Utah.
Tell me about what kind of programming you did for them. Can you remember back? Because I mean, it had to be strength, and did you work with them on their endurance? I'm really curious about. I have actually programmed for a rugby player, so it's an interesting exercise for me. Go ahead.
Yeah. So let's go back to like when we first got the contract, right? So the way we had gotten that contract is I had a friend and he was another veteran, and he and I had met through the Veterans Association there at the University of Utah, and he just happened to be on the rugby team. And he had come to me and said, "Hey, I need some strength and conditioning over the off season. I'm debating between asking you or asking this other person out in California." And I told him, "Hey, where's your family at?" Because he had a wife and kid and everything else, and they weren't going to go with him to California. And I told him, "Look, I'm going to train you for free. Stay here. Not going to cost you anything. We'll do everything because you're kind of my test bunny. I've never coached rugby players before, so this will be really good
Yeah.
education for me." Well, he brought two other players with him. And so now I had a small cohort of three players, and none of them were in the tight five, which actually worked out really well in my favor because I could train them basically the same. And
By type five, you mean they're not in the scrum? They're wings. Go ahead.
exactly. Over the course of doing the research, I was researching things like the Scottish rugby team, the All Blacks, the Australian teams, things like that, and trying to get a profile of what a good, solid rugby athlete actually looks like. And then we did some basic testing. We did some VO2 max testing. We did some 90-minute run capacity testing. We did some sprints. We did some strength. And once we kind of got a good idea of where the baseline was, and then we looked at where we wanted to go. And when I broke the sport down, it was like, okay, basically it's like you said, it's soccer, but high impact soccer. So
Right.
we have to be able to move fast. We have to be able to sprint. We have to be able to play for all 90 minutes, and we got to be able to take a hit. So we just worked backwards from there. So I built it into phases. So I started with endurance first because I knew going into being in the off season, that's probably the hardest thing to build. It takes the most time to build. And we weren't really taking any impact. There were no practices. There were no matches coming up. Nothing was coming up. So we started with that 90-minute ability to play. So I started them out on 60-minute runs and slowly built that up to 90-minute runs at LSD pace. So keeping the heart rate nice and low, trying to build that base capacity at the same time as working on their max strength outputs. And at first I thought those would be mutually exclusive, right? Like if I do too much endurance, the strength will suffer. But what I found is that if I do 2 or 3 days of good long runs and then 2 or 3 days of strength, I can get what I need out of these guys. And so we started doing that. We started seeing some strength increases. We started seeing, and we were using the basics, right? Front squat, back squat, power clean, deadlifts, all of those, doing everything by the basics, by the numbers, nothing fancy. And got them to the point where we were about 4 weeks out from tryouts from that first initial practice. And then we started mixing in things like work capacity sets, durability sets, density sets. And the density style of
density sets, is that on strength or work capacity?
Strength. Yeah. So,
Got it.
for
Go
example,
ahead.
if we did like a push pull upper body, they would have 2 minutes to be able to complete the sets at that percentage of their 1 rep max. And whatever they had was rest. And that worked really, really well to help train up that creophosphagen system to be able to do repeat really hard efforts. And then when they showed up to that first practice, the coach, they were running circles around everybody, just having their way with them. And the head coach pulled him aside and said, "Hey, what did you guys do? What did you guys do in the off season?" And they gave him my name. And next thing I know, I'm getting a call from the head coach, and he wants to come down and meet me. So he came down and met me at the gym, and we had a nice long conversation about what I had done with the guys, how I would train the team if they wanted to train with us, and it went from there.
So let's go back to that a little bit on that programming. Did you do any like shuttle sprint repeats for work capacity, or did you just kind of LSD? Density sets and strength. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we did do some shuttle repeats because we needed to, right? Because we needed to build that capacity to sprint hard for about 20. And when I looked at the studies, I watched a few matches. It looked like 10 to 20 meters was about the distance that we needed to be able to go super hard. And so we made that our target. So we started at 10 meters, being able to get to the point where they're sprinting back and forth on 10 meters as quickly as they possibly can, giving them a full rest, letting the heart rate come completely down, and then repeating it. And then eventually we took rest away. And then we made the distance further and further and further. So their ability to recover, I wanted to enhance that ability to recover so that they could continue those efforts throughout the match.
Got it. So in that kind of design, would you, for example, maybe start at like a classic for me is a 300-meter shuttle, and we'll start at 2.5 minutes, one every 2.5 minutes, and then drop the time back. Something similar is what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe a shorter distance. Got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is so interesting thinking about that sport because I've actually seen I don't know, you've probably seen this too, especially in rugby, is what an incredible strength and conditioning culture Australia has, and how much they have just in terms of their work on Australian rules football. I mean, all the good work is being done down in Australia, and I'm sure you dove into some of that.
Yeah, the Australian National Institute of Sport has a lot of resources, and it's incredible to kind of dig into their information and the stuff they put out. Just on their rugby players, on their cycling program, their track cycling especially, they've been doing some amazing work on the strength and conditioning side.
You worked with the rugby team for what, a couple years?
Yeah, 2 years. Team? Yep.
Can you were you primarily off season, and they had a fall and spring season, or so you had them just in the winter for off season, or did you in season stuff too?
All the whole thing. So we did in season as well. Yeah, and we did both 15s and 7s.
Oh. Well, take me into where that programming evolved. When you were, I guess, your second season. In terms of strength, were you able to set, or did you have strength standards based on position?
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
Kinda. So we had split them up between those in the scrum and those on the wings, right? So the people in the scrum, obviously, they're heavy. like really, really heavy. And they're doing a lot of accessory work when it comes to spinal tissue and making sure their backs are super strong and they can hold that position in a very solid manner. So like your lower back complex, for example, was instrumental. Whether you use it or not anymore, that worked
Yeah, we use it.
amazingly
Yeah.
well to help stabilize that spine so that we didn't have any injuries. In fact, going into the second season, the head coach asked me, it's like, look, I know what you're charging, but I would pay double if all you did was kept my guys healthy. I'm like, you got it. Let's make them healthy. And so we did a lot of durability work, a lot of strength across ranges of motion. And so
What
things
do
like,
you? Yeah, give me an example.
yeah, so things like the cars. So if you look at CFSC, right, you have your contracted articular rotations, being able to control your joint throughout the entire range of motion so you don't have any real loss across that range, so that when you are put into extreme situations, say you get tackled and you land a little weird, your muscles aren't just failing. They're not just giving out. They're able to control themselves within that range. So we started playing around with a lot of that stuff.
They're like cable work.
More like bands. We didn't have cables in our gym, and
Just
so
a
we
tiny
had to
little
get
gym.
yeah, we had to get a little creative. So bands, kettlebells worked amazingly well. Things like just body weight, body weight, being able to know how to control your body in space, what became a driving factor. So full depth squats, not, oh, we hit 90, we're good to go. It's like, no, let's lower the weight. Let's go ass to ankles and then push through. And then, elevated split squats, for example. So we're extending that range of motion so they have control over it.
Well, you did one arm testing, I'm sure, or did you do it with both?
Yep.
What were your lifts? What lifts for your testing?
Yeah, so I actually reflected what the Scottish team was doing, and their main thing was back squat, deadlift, and bench press. I liked all three of those, so we used those. Right, we wanted a 2-to-1 ratio or 2-to-1 twice body weight for back squat. We wanted 2.5 body weight for deadlift, and we wanted 1.75 body weight for bench press. That was the goal for everybody, regardless of position.
Yeah, strong. For
Yeah.
athlete who moves, it's strong. Yeah, go ahead.
And then for the type 5, we bumped everything up by 25%. So
And so that's the guys in the scrum.
yes, yeah, yeah, and that was mostly for, we know that strength is durability, right? If you're strong, you're probably going to be able to control that joint. You're probably going to be able to control your body. So the strongest I can make you, hey, we're in business. In fact, we had one guy get up to a 515-pound back squat, and he was barely 200 pounds. So yeah, he ended up playing for the Eagles for a while out in Australia. So, that was a really cool experience to be able to coach somebody up in the strength and conditioning side and have them join the national team to go overseas.
Did you do any Olympic lifting, or did you mess around with it? You didn't have like a one round power clean or anything, but go ahead.
Well, I power clean, I'll be honest, power clean is my favorite lift. And I think it's because it is so technical, but it's also useful because anytime you pick something up off the ground or you pick yourself up off the ground, there's a bit of that in there, right? And how quickly you can do it matters, especially in a sport like rugby where you're going to get knocked down. You're going to have to get back up. So yeah, power cleans played a big role. So did burpees if we're talking about body weight, because you're going to get knocked down. You got to get back up and get sprinting again.
Tell me about your burpee programming.
So we started with a 5-minute burpee test, which is just
Terrible.
awful,
Terrible.
awful. Um, and this one actually
Did you
permeated.
did you have standards? Did you have like hop over a bar or jump high, or was it just get down and stand up?
Get down and get back up for 5
Got it.
minutes,
Okay.
right? We
Got it.
did have standards like full hip extension, small jump at the top, but it didn't need to be a 12-inch jump. As long as I could slide a piece of paper under your foot, that's really as much as I asked for them. Because in reality, when you look at rugby, for example, you're not jumping 12 inches and then trying to sprint downfield. You're just trying to get up off the ground, and then you can sprint. So we played around with some ideas like standards, like, okay, is 75 a good standard for 5 minutes? Is 100 a good standard for 5 minutes? We never really got to a point where we were like, okay, this is the standard. We just said, okay, if you can suffer for a 5-minute burpee test, you'll probably be okay. If you can give me like 10 per minute, I would be happy, right? If that's your suffering capacity.
You remember what your progression was for that? You did an assessment and then assessment based progression.
Yeah, so we did the assessment first. We would do the 5-minute test first just to see where everybody's at. And then we would work that into our work capacity. So if we had a day, like I actually used one of your workouts that I experienced when I was up visiting you as a primary way to progress, where it'd be that 2 burpees, 1 suicide every 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
Oh yeah, and we built it up to the point where they were doing 5 burpees and 1 suicide in every 30 seconds.
Wow, nice work.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, you guys have the capacity now. It's, that's great. That's where we want to be. And then when we would retest, we would see a markedly big jump as far as their burpee capacity goes. And some of that I think is just their ability to handle suffering. And some of it is also the technique. Because when you have to do 5 burpees, 1 suicide in 30 seconds, and the faster you go, the more rest you get. And they want that rest. They're moving. And when you put a group of guys, I would have 5 of them lined up on our turf, and 5 would be going at once, and they're racing. They're
Yeah, yeah.
competing against each other. It was a lot of fun to see.
And you do that for 20 rounds? It's like
Oh
10-minute
yeah,
effort. Oh,
yep.
yeah, it's terrible.
I started with 5. I started with a 5-minute effort because the first time I ran it, everybody threw up. Everybody was outside, hands on their knees, buckled over, just coating our entire parking lot. So I was like, all right, let's bump this down a little bit.
Do you remember, in terms of the strength progression, were you just using the standard, classic, fucking works every time, percentage-based strength progression? Go ahead.
Yeah, TLU. I was using your basic TLU,
Got it.
for most of it, and that system worked amazing. When we needed to progress, like say after about 6 weeks, so that would be our standard progression was 4 to 6 weeks. I know when I learned from you, it was 3 weeks, but I think that was more for like people who had no real on season or off season or anything like that. You have to
Yeah.
be at your top of your game constantly, whereas these guys, we could actually take a little bit more time. And so we would spend 4 to 6 weeks, work through all of that, have a deload week at the end where we retest all of their 1RMs and try to get their PRs so that we can base the next phase on those new PRs.
In terms of the weekly schedule for the off season, what would that look like?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it would have progressed. So you went through the off season, but the beginning of the off season, first day of off season, come back, hit strength first, or what were you thinking?
So depending on if they did 7s or not, I would give them a break because 7s is the version that's usually done in the springtime.
Okay.
And so if they did 7s, then I would back off, give them a week or 2 to just decompress, relax, do whatever they want to do, go spend time with their family because it's a long, hard season. If they didn't do 7s and they were just on the 15s, then we would start immediately into the strength work. I want to get that. I want to get as much time with the 15s guys and get them as strong as I possibly can because if they're going to be in the scrum, that's basically their primary role.
Were you doing strength like three times a week or 4 times a week?
3 times a week. Yeah. If we were doing hypertrophy, we would make it 4. But if we were doing, because I used that same volumetric program for a while, the 8x8, 6x10, 4x12, which people hated, by the way. I loved it.
Yeah.
But
hypertrophy, people don't realize how terrible it is.
Yeah, especially if you go hard enough, and that's and that was
terrible.
really the caveat, right? Because it's like if they're doing 8 of 8 and they're just like, oh yeah, this is no big deal. Oh, this is easy. It's like go heavier. It's like I want you failing on that last rep on the last set, and they kind of look at me like what, and then they're walking out of there shaking because they actually completely use up all their glycogen stores and they're just smoked, and it's like that's what it should feel like.
Yeah, we used to tease each other. When I was in my 20s, just doing bodybuilding type stuff. Just when I first got out of the academy, we had funny. I think we got like something on a muscle and fitness. I don't know what it was, but we'd have to take, and that wasn't a good upper body session. If you in the shower, if you'd raise your arms up, you'd squirt this shampoo on the side of the shower and rub your head on it like that because it was so bad. Oh yeah, so awesome. And then I assumed that over the course of the off season, you would start going more work capacity and less strength and more into endurance.
Exactly. Yeah. So, if with the 7s, as soon as they hit the ground, we're starting to get ready for 15s. And that means we've got to build their ability to run up again. And, we're not doing sprints. We're doing long, slow distance, 60 to 90 minutes, just building up that capacity. And I would encourage them to run in pairs or in groups. That way and to talk.
They would do that on their own, right?
Or they would do that on their own. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
The most boring thing for a strength coach is to sit there at the start of a run with a stopwatch. It's
It's
Nobody
terrible.
wants to do that. But if I put them out in groups and said, okay, look, I want, because most of them didn't have heart rate monitors, right? Most of them have no idea where their actual zone 2 is. So
Right.
if I say I want you to go out and I want to be able to have a conversation the entire time, like if you're to the point where you're breathing heavy and you can't have a conversation, it's too hard. Bring it back. Walk if you need to, but keep that heart rate nice and low so you can have a conversation. And that kept them on track, right? Using that same talk mentality where it's like, okay, now we want to put a little some tempo intervals. All right, you can have a sentence between breaths, but no more. Just giving them those left and right limits to say, okay, this is what I want to see, and it worked great. They followed it to the letter, most of them, and ended up getting amazing results.
At the, I'm assuming that you moved more towards work capacity and endurance as you got closer to the beginning of the season. What would that weekly schedule look like? Are you doing like strength once a week to maintain, or twice a week, and the rest? Go ahead.
So at the beginning, as we get closer to the season, say 8 weeks out from tryouts or 8 weeks out from the first practice, that's when we start throwing in some harder work capacity. It would be strength still twice a week. One day a week would have that work capacity. One day a week would have dedicated running intervals. And then the other 2 days would be long, slow distance.
Would you, in terms of long, slow distance, did you ever do an assessment, or you would just progress it based on time?
Just progress it based on time.
Start at
Everybody's,
60 and go to 90? Go ahead.
yeah, because, when over the course of my education, as far as endurance coaching goes, I came to realize that the body doesn't recognize distance, right? All it understands is time and intensity. That's it. And so since it only recognizes those two things, the best thing for me to increase would be your amount of time under tension. So if I'm looking at, hey, this is a 90-minute match, they're not able to hold 90 minutes of constant running yet. Let's start easier. Let's say 45 minutes at half the time. And then we'll just add 10 minutes every other week until they reach that 90-minute capacity.
I'm kind of interested for the scrum. Did you do like any heavy sled pushes or anything to, mimic the sled stuff, or just rely on your, the scrum push, or did you just rely on your strength work for that?
So mostly the strength work, we use a lot of squats, a lot of front squats, back squats, double kettlebell front squats, goblet squats, for slow, like long, slow eccentrics, a lot of prowler sled push, where we would stack that thing up to be 500 pounds and then put two of them on it and make them push it around the parking lot. So we tried to mimic it as close as possible without being overly focused, if that makes sense.
Got it.
Because
Yeah.
during the practices, they're going to get all of that practice, right? I don't need to worry about any of that stuff. As long as their legs and back and shoulders can stay in the proper positions and they can move that weight with their legs without throwing their back out, we're in business.
On lower back stuff, did you mess with heavy good mornings or anything like that?
No, not really. No, just usually just stuck to Romanian deadlifts.
Good. Looking back on the seasons that you did have with them, what were some of the big, or did you make any big programming mistakes? And if so, what were they that you changed?
Oh yeah. Because it's a club team, you had all different levels of fitness, right? If it had been like a D1 scholarship, like UCLA has a dedicated rugby program, right? It's almost as big as their like baseball program. Whereas at the University of Utah, it's a club team. So you get people who are coming from the football team who are like third string and they just want to get some extra playing time in a different sport. You're getting who are in great shape. You get people who are dedicated rugby players who want to go to the national team and try to make the new rugby major league out here in the US. We had some of those players. And then you've got the guys who have never heard of rugby a day in their life. They just saw this club team at the walkthrough in the first week of school, and they're like, "Hey, that looks like fun. Those guys look cool. I'll go train. I'll go be with them." And so I had to, man, when they first came in, I had the program set for people who were dedicated rugby athletes, people who were ready to go, who were in great shape, had pretty good mechanics already. And when the guys actually showed up, yeah, that wasn't the case. I had 15 guys who were in good shape. And then I had another 15 guys who, oh boy, I got to teach you how to squat properly. And so luckily we had two of us. Luckily we had me and my brother were coaching. And so
Yeah.
one of us could take hey, go work with them on mechanics, go work with them on the durability piece for you go work on the heavy piece over here.
Tell me about I know you worked with an obstacle course racer.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a female or male? Female, right?
Female. Yep. I actually had a professional women's team for a little while that we ran out of our gym. They were sponsored by us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is this like Spartan races? The
Yep.
Spartan stuff? It's so interesting. I've done some programming for that, and how incredible, or how most of those races are so biased towards just running and endurance.
Hmm.
It's mostly a long run with a few stuff in between, and the stuff in between has a really heavy grip strength
Yep.
emphasis.
Yep.
Tell me about your programming for that and for that person. And I'm really interested in the mix between the endurance work and the specifics on the endurance work you did, and then some of the stuff you did for the obstacles.
Yeah. So we'll start with the running. So when I looked at like the sport, right, in your analysis, you're absolutely right. It's a running race first, right?
Right. Yeah.
Obstacles are second. So they just happen to be in the way. Well, okay, so let's train running. Let's make you the best runner that you can possibly be, specifically off-road runner. So we would start with, in the off season, we would do long, slow runs, just as normal. They would run anywhere from 4 to 6 days a week. I had the mindset of if it's important for your sport, do it often. If it's crucial for your sport, do it every day. And so they were running often, right? Now the runs might be a 45-minute active recovery run, or it could be a 3.5 hour go into the mountains, go climb to the top of the mountain that you can get to off road, and then run back down and just do it as many times as you can do it in 3.5 hours. It really depended on where they were in the cycle and everywhere in between. We would start with the long, slow distance, right, where that was the main majority for the off season in the snow in Utah, which makes for a really, really fun time. I insisted that they don't use treadmills unless they absolutely had to, because I have a definite hate toward treadmills. I think that they actually cause more problems than they fix. So if they weren't injured, or they could get outside, or we weren't in a blizzard, then they were going outside. Part of that also is like learn how to suffer. These races are in the elements. You don't get to choose the elements. So figure it out. And then when we added intervals in, we would start with longer intervals, like 20-minute sub tempo, a little bit elevated from zone 2, but not quite all the way into zone 3.
Were these athletes all on heart rate monitors?
Yep. Yeah, they were all on
Okay.
heart rate monitors. We were sponsored by Polar. So we
Okay.
had heart rate monitors, we had watches, we could upload everything. It gave me a great way to tell like where they are as far as their journey goes.
Yeah, there's different distances of races. Were these athletes focusing on all the distances, or certain athletes focusing on certain distances?
Yeah. So the first year that we ran the team, it was basically all distances. There was no differentiation. As Spartan race progressed, and we progressed along with them, where I had one girl who she specialized in ultra endurance races. Right. So she was getting beasts and above. We had another girl, hey, I want to go into the world championships. Okay, great. We're going to train. Your supers are what you're really good at. That's where your bread and butter is. But let's train you for the beast, because it's not that much different. Right. It's just a little longer. Then I had a couple girls who sprints were their game, 5K fast as you can. And they loved that stuff. So it really depended on the person.
So, and I assume that based on the distance of the event, that would somewhat impact their endurance programming or not.
Mm-hmm. It would.
I'm assuming. Go ahead.
Yeah, it had to. So I would look at the top 10 placings for the races in the previous year, and then say, okay, well, people are averaging 2 hours and 10 minutes, let's say, for this particular event. I'm going to add 30% to that, and that's going to be their longest runs.
Got it. And then you'd work backward. Can you go more into the endurance programming for that? I'm always frustrated with endurance programming, just because we've written about this and I've struggled with it. Defining aerobic base. When do you have enough aerobic base? Is it just time? I can only find, 2 or 3 friggin', certain measures of aerobic base.
Mm-hmm.
How did you work with that? Or was your base period timed, or did you bother with it? Go ahead.
So I would use a 10K time trial. When I would assess them, I'd be like, okay, we're going to measure out 10 kilometers, and you're going to go as fast as you can. And then that would actually give us their Z4 pace, right? So we would start with heart rate in the off season, because heart rate would tell me exactly how much stress their body is under for that given amount of time. And then as the season drew closer, we would switch to pacing. And that's where that 10K time trial would start to come in place, right? So not only did it give me a high Z3, low Z4 heart rate, and then I could plan all my heart rate values from that, but it would also give me their pacing. And so we would run that 10K time trial every 8 weeks at the beginning. just to kind of see like, okay, how are we progressing? Are we doing the right things? Do we need to make adjustments? And then from there, we would just plan everything out. And so if we did something like, let's go 4 by 10 minute intervals at sweet spot level, which is essentially 84 to 97% their race pace. So it's just right below that race pace. So they're a little bit sub anaerobic threshold, but they're still going hard. They're going to feel it, right? Their heart rate's going to be elevated. They're going to be pushing a little bit, and that would start their interval stuff, right? That would get their body primed up, ready to go. And as the intervals got shorter, the intensity went up.
So let me make sure I understand correctly. Early in the season, you're using heart rate to program, but then you would use the 10K, you get their pace, and then you kind of use what Daniels does, and they would run based on, based on your pace, you need to run this distance in this time. And that's how you would modulate the intensity.
Exactly. And we would use things like 10 by 800s. So if somebody was doing the...
oh, God, 10 of them?
It's awful. It is awful. So there was a guy, I cannot remember the man's name, but there was a guy who published this thing about running a marathon, right? And if you can run 800 meters in say 3 minutes consistently over 10 reps, you should be able to run a marathon in 3 hours, right? That's the theory. And I was kind of like, all right, let's see if there's any validity to this, and started putting my athletes through it. I mean, I don't think we got that fast. I think they were all around 3.5 minutes. But what it did do is that 800-meter distance, it made them very, very fast for that 800-meter distance. And they tend to group obstacles together in about 800 meters.
Oh, really? Even for the longer races?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so because they come in groups like that, having that 800-meter effort actually paid off dividends, because now it was covering the whole distance of those obstacles, and they were used to going really hard for that amount of time.
Yeah, because those races are won and lost in the running, because that's where you're doing the most. Well, do you remember back to those 10 by 8s? What was a rest? Was it set on a density, or did you have a set rest?
Yeah, so at first I would start with a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, and then I would slowly start picking away at it. So it would start at 1-to-1, then 1.5-to-1 work to rest, then 2-to-1. Eventually we got to 3-to-1 work to rest, where their rest times were relatively only about a minute, and their heart rates were barely coming down to that zone 2 level before they had to go again.
Wow, God, that's terrible. You'd use a track for that? Would you go to track, or did you, okay, you use a track?
Yeah, I needed that as controlled as possible. It's right. If we would go out into the field somewhere and use a trail, it just wasn't controlled enough. There's too many variables.
Can you give me an idea for the base building period on the endurance side for the athletes who are doing the longer races, what their weekly volume would be, either in time or mileage, just in terms of their running?
Yeah, so most of these athletes, they all have jobs. They couldn't.
They're not full time.
They're not full time. They're not training.
They couldn't train 35 hours a week. Right.
No. So I would try to keep it right around that 10 to 15 hours, no more than that. Right. So it's enough training that I can get them really, really good. They're going to be training more than the average person, their average competitor, because, let's face it, there's maybe 3 or 4 people in all of Spartan race who are getting paid well.
Right.
And so because they're in the top, let's say 10% of their competitors as far as training time goes, then I can elicit a better response. I can elicit winning fitness. So I would plan backwards from there. So we would look at, okay, how many days a week do we want to do strength or work capacity or obstacle skill drills and things like that. And I would subtract that from my total time. And then I would plan the runs accordingly. So if we dedicated, let's say 3 days a week to strength, and we were going to take anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes for a strength session, and I had 12 hours to work with that whole week, take those out, that leaves me 7.5 hours for running. Okay, this is how many 90-minute runs I can do. This is the one long run I can do. And then I can plan it out that way.
Tell me, what are you doing for strength? Did you do general strength, or just like focus on the obstacles?
Yeah, so in the off season, I would do general strength. And that was, my philosophy is build durable athletes who can compete the whole season. And what I found is that I go general strength at the beginning. When I do introduce specialized strength, their bodies are more prepared for it. And
can you tell me about that general strength? What are you doing? High intensity, 5x2, 5x3, 1RMs, or were you Go
No,
ahead.
it was usually 4 or 5 by 8s. So we would stick to that
Doing that.
hypertrophy, like the lower level hypertrophy, upper level strength zones.
Really? Okay.
And that way we'd be building that strength, but still working on that strength endurance. Because
Yeah, that's a
the goal was never to put on a lot of size, right?
right.
The goal was to make them a little more physiologically inefficient, I guess, to kind of cut down their body fat, because they're all going to gain a little bit of weight in the off season. That's normal for endurance athletes. I'm going to cut that body fat down, get their body firing at a higher metabolic level before I start introducing much harder things later on.
Any specific selection to the lifts that's unique or special or changed over the time that you use?
Yes and no. During the off season, it's still the basics, right? You still got your squats, your deadlifts, your upper body push pulls, vertical, horizontal, all of that, going through all of that stuff. I would also look at planes of motion. So, we got the transverse plane, frontal plane, sagittal plane. I want to use them all, right? I want to get their body accustomed to using all of them because they're all going to be necessary during the race, whether they want to admit it or not. They're all necessary. And then some skill stuff that we can throw in that are very low intensity that we just need practice in are things like that spear throw, because that's a high fail obstacle. That's something that doesn't require a
What is
lot of
it?
the
The
spear
spear
throw.
throw? Okay.
That obstacle has a higher than 50% fail rate.
And if you fail, you got to do burpees or something, right?
It used to be burpees. Now they do laps. So they actually make you run, I think it's an 800-meter lap. And it's like, that's longer than 30 burpees. Because I would
Oh yeah,
train my
yeah.
people to be able to do 30 burpees in 90 seconds or less so that they didn't lose a lot of time. That was always the goal.
What would a strength session look like? Would it be total body every session, upper body, lower body split, something like that?
Total body every session. So we would go through a standard warm up with the a good dynamic warm up to get them moving in all planes, get their body warmed up, and then introduce some of that first main lift, into their warm up, so that if they were doing back squats, let's say, they would be warming up with the barbell. It might only be the barbell, or it might be 95 pounds, depending on how strong they actually are. Going through a couple of rounds of that, and then we would get right into it. And typically we would do an 8x3 for that big heavy lift, because that's what that first lift, that really focused lift that I want to really enhance, we're going to go heavy. And then we would go 4x8s for the rest of the next set, and then the accessories at the end.
Got it. I know I mentioned grip earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Did you need to focus on grip with them, and how? If so, how did you do it?
Oh yeah, grip was paramount.
It's
And
everything in those events. Yeah.
it is. And they tend to group those obstacles together. So say, for
All
example,
the grip obstacles are together. All the grip ones. Go
yep,
ahead.
every time. There's usually at least 2 or 3 that are grouped together. So that means your grip has to be amazing. So we would actually start with a 5-minute cumulative dead hang, where you would start the clock, jump up, hang from the bar, go until just before failure, because I don't want you going all the way to failure. Failure is going to take forever to recover from. They would hop off, stop their stopwatch, and they would just keep doing that until they got to 5 minutes.
Got it.
Sometimes it would take a really long time. Other times, and we would get to the point where they could do it in 3 holds. That was the
Were you
goal.
working with only women, or did you have men too?
Oh, I had men too.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so we would work up to the point where you could do that 5 minutes with 3 holds, which was really good. So it'd be like 2 minutes, minute and a half kind of thing. Great. Okay, great starting point. Now, when we looked at the obstacle specific stuff, so things like the monkey bars or the rings and things like that, we found that having a flexed hold shortened that reach, and you could actually control it, and you didn't put any unnecessary strain on the shoulders, so you could actually save your shoulders. So we moved on to flexed hang. Same
So you're
idea.
hanging flexed. Yeah.
Yep, same idea. 5-minute cumulative flexed hang. And then we would start getting a little fancy with it, where it's like, okay, now we're going to hold 20-second dead hang, 10-second flexed hang. We would do 5 sets of that. And then we get to the point where you're hanging from the bar and you're doing shoulder touches and all the way down to your feet. So you have to actually tuck your hips up to you. So you get really, really comfortable hanging from a bar in all these different ways. And when you get to the obstacles, you only have to hang one way, and it's easy.
Were you using different grip? I mean, pull-up. Were you using all these different grips, or
Mm-hmm.
just primarily pull-up bar?
Primarily pull-up bar, but we started
That's what you had,
throwing
yeah.
in things like holding a tennis ball in each hand that was slightly deflated, putting that on the bar, and then like having that open grip. We would use rock climbing grips for things like 3 fingers, because sometimes a finger will slip off and you've got to be able to get that back. All so many different kinds of little tools.
Oh
ropes.
yeah,
Hanging like vertical grip is wildly different than pronated grip. So being able
yeah.
to grip something like this and to be able to reach and move on, it's actually really, really difficult. And so, when things got harder, like the races, every year the races would get harder. They'd come out with new obstacles. They would come out with crazy new obstacles sometimes. And we would have to adapt. And that meant buying new tools. And yeah, those vertical grips came in.
Did you ever load them for their hangs, or is it
No,
all mostly just body weight? Yeah,
mostly body
yeah,
weight.
me too.
I considered it because sometimes they do carry things like camelbacks for those longer races, or they're wet and their bodies are soaked, and that weighs a little bit more. But ultimately, when it came down to it, it's like the juice really wasn't worth the squeeze on that. And the only thing that I did do that would make things considerably harder is, as we prepared for the World Championships, typically those were done. Well, in those last couple of years, they were all done in Tahoe, and morning time in Tahoe is really cold, and that water is going to be absolutely freezing. So I'd actually have them put their hands into ice water for about, we started with 10 seconds and we moved up to about 30 seconds, to the point where they almost couldn't feel their hands, and now dead hang.
Oh well, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good for you. And you did have one athlete. I think she was a world champion or went to championships, right? Or was she a world champion?
No, she was world champion. She age group, but yeah, world champion.
Good for you.
Yeah, she was an amazing athlete. She was the first woman I signed on to the team. And when I talked to her, she said that her whole goal was to just get into the world championships. And back then it was, you had to place in, like, I think the top 15 of an elite level race. You get your coin, that all stuff. It took us one race to get there.
Oh
And
well.
then, and I kind of looked at her as like, that was easy. Like, you can win this thing. Just so you know, like, if you ever want to do it, you can win. You could win the world championships.
What was her athletic background? Do you know? Do you remember?
She's a swimmer.
Swimmer. So she was she tall?
No, about my height, so 5'7", 5'8".
Okay, not exceptionally tall.
No,
Wow,
she was just
interesting.
she was a beast. I mean, she did the Spartan television show, if you remember that. They did a couple seasons of that. Yeah, it was some Spartan challenge. She was on the show. She went to the Tough Mudder, the 1 mile event. She actually qualified for the second round of that and ended up being knocked out the second round. But that was $100,000 payday if she had gone all the way. She was an extremely talented athlete.
Well, obviously big lungs coming from swimming. Well,
Hmm.
good for you. Now it seems that after you're working at your own gym, you kind of started getting into the personal training stuff with
I did.
Equinox.
Yeah,
I mean, did you do any personal training at your own gym?
I did. Yeah, not a ton, because we
Yeah.
were pretty expensive and most people were fully comfortable with the classes. I did have a few clients, long-term clients. Like, when they signed up, they didn't go anywhere. So that was really great. But I didn't have a ton of experience on the personal side.
Do you like personal training? Obviously, you must.
I do. There's pluses and minuses to it. Just like there is, when you're a strength conditioning coach for a team, there's always like little things that you're like, oh, I wish this could be better. The biggest struggle I found in personal training is getting the right message out so that people understand what you're actually capable of doing, and then having them know that, hey, I'm not a magic worker. I can't give you Brad Pitt abs if you don't do the work.
Got it. So you went to Equinox, and I've
Hmm.
never been in an Equinox place. I've only read about it.
Hmm.
But this is like a high-end friggin' place, right?
It is, yeah. And I came in there as a fitness manager, so I got hired directly into management.
Really?
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
What was that? Why did you apply for that job?
you know, I being out here in California, it's like I needed a job that I needed something with benefits. I needed something with a little bit more stability. And working at going to the smaller gyms and things like that, there wasn't a lot of stability at that time. And so I was like, okay, I can learn something. And even though this is like, in my mind, I'm like, even though this is the evil empire, this is not who I, this is not what where my mindset is, but I can learn something. And one of the things I think I struggled when I was running my own gym was the business side. And so I wanted to go out and learn that. And the best way to do that is go work for something.
And do you remember what that job interview was like?
Yeah, it was long.
Really?
It took me almost 3 months, and I had, I think, 10 or 11 job interviews before they finally gave me the job. It got to the point where 24 Hour Fitness had put an offer on the table, and I had to call up Equinox and say, hey, I've got an offer. It's like, you guys in or not? And that was when they pulled the trigger finally.
And what was your So you went in as the business manager. Did you have any personal training clients at the time, or you were managing? Tell me, were you managing the facility, the whole thing? the personal trainers working underneath you? What were you doing?
Yeah, so at that time I was a fitness manager. I later became a personal training manager, which is more of the business side of the more senior trainers. But I started as a fitness manager, and my main role was education for the juniors, the junior coaches. And I really enjoyed that process. I enjoyed teaching. I enjoy bringing everything that I had learned up to that point from various other coaches and my own personal experience, and then giving them that information, right? And saying, hey, if you want to try it, try it. But most importantly, it's kind of like one of the things I learned from you is always being curious. Like, if you have a question about something, let's try it. What's the worst that can happen? I mean, yeah, you can go through all the different studies in the world, but you never really know until you give it a shot. And that was that mindset I was trying to instill in them, where it's like, look, you may not have the best answer, but sometimes the best answer is just giving something a try.
So with these trainers, they would come to you, or would you have to approve their programming, or
Hmm.
would you just give it okay? And so they
Yeah.
would come, and I assume it was somewhat based on the athlete coming in. But was there a whole lot of variety to it, or does Equinox have a certain philosophy? They kind of everybody falls within the certain guardrails.
At the time, there were some guardrails, but it was kind of still the Wild West, where the coaches had a lot of free reign, and it still kind of is that way. They have a little bit more guardrails now with how they do things, but back then there was no like pre-designed programs for this goal or whatever. Everything was created on its own. In fact, we were still using Google Sheets at the time. That's how in the dark ages the actual gym was, or that industry was back then. Now we have all kinds of technology that we can leverage. But back then, we were still using Google Sheets. I'd have to go in there, check their program, make sure they even had programming, because that was usually my biggest headache, was that somebody just didn't bother programming, and then their client would show up and they would just do whatever. And educating them like, hey, that's not the right answer. Always have a plan, always know where you're going. That way, if your plan isn't going the way it's supposed to be going, you can make changes. And sometimes it was like pulling teeth. With some of the more senior trainers who'd been there a long time, been doing it the same way forever. The junior trainers were a little bit more open to that kind of mindset. And so their programming actually improved it greatly. And I taught them everything I could, from nonlinear or linear to nonlinear, to the fluid style periodization, to, non-competing sets, and everything in between.
Did you, in terms of personal trainers, because you've been on the business side of that too, can you describe like one of the two of the best personal trainers you ever worked with, or you ever had work for you?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
And tell me, what do they look like? I mean, I'm thinking LA. I mean, these guys are, beautiful, but maybe they weren't. Go ahead. You're kind of ugly, so go ahead.
Hey, I'm married. I don't have to worry about that. One of the better trainers I've had. So there's two different types of trainers that I look for. One is the one that's crazy knowledgeable, has been doing it forever, and is extremely good at what they do. One of the guys was actually here at the last Equinox I was at, down in Palos Verdes. This guy is like a Greg Cook disciple, right? Everything that he puts out, this guy digests. And he uses the FMS for literally everything. Extremely knowledgeable. I've seen clients come in with back pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, hip pain, and he corrects their movement, gets their patterns moving properly, loads them up, does amazing things with them. And then I've had the trainers that have almost no knowledge that come in, but they want to learn. And those are by far, that was my favorite, because it's just like, let me teach you how to find, not only give you the knowledge that I have, but let me teach you how to find the knowledge that you want when you come across a problem that you can't solve. And those were the funnest ones. And I had a guy here that when we first hired him, he started the same time I did when I took over the managerial role at Palos Verdes. He started at the exact same time. He was the first guy I onboarded at that particular gym, taught him about how to run a business, taught him how to build his business, and kind of held his hand through that first initial 6 months. And after 6 months, he was full time, which is for Equinox, that's doing 90 sessions every month, which it's not a huge number, but it does take some time, and it does take a lot of effort. And he was able to get there in 6 months, which that's pretty fast.
Yeah, and that's not like, I mean, how do those sessions come to that trainer? Is it word of mouth from previous clients who kind of say, oh, this guy's really good? Or I guess, how is a client assigned to a trainer?
So that's so there's various different ways, right? So when people sign up for the gym, I would get their name, and I would usually pass them off. Normally, I would give them a call, give that new client or new member a call, figure out some basic info about them, like what their goals are, what got them to join Equinox, etc. And then I would select which trainer they should go to get sent to based on that information. That trainer is then going to take them through an entire hour-long consult, basically a needs analysis. We taught them all how to do FMSs, so they would do an FMS on them just to see how they move. They would do an in-body, which we'll save my comments for in-body later, but they would do an in-body so we could actually see what was going on inside the person, and then that it would allow them to actually have that sales conversation. Now at Equinox, you do get your own clients, right? So how you speak to people, how you build buy-in, how you create value is extremely important. Sometimes I would help them close, but for the most part, they were on their own. And so part of the education that I would have to give them is, other than sets and reps and rest times and everything else, is how do you have a conversation? And that's the, if I could put one skill set into all these different personal trainer education things, is how to have a conversation with somebody.
No, tell me about that. Go into that. What are the mistakes people make? I mean, what are some of the basics?
Yeah. So a lot of trainers want to talk about how great they are, right? How amazing their programming is, how perfect how great their training sessions are going to be with them, how much knowledge they know about nutrition, when honestly, that's the opposite of what you need to do. Because the person that's sitting in front of you, you don't even know what their problem is yet. So find the problem and then provide the solution. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't provide a solution.
I mean, Chris, how many different, most of the problems are pretty basic, right? They're not that many variables or problems. Or am I missing something?
Well, I mean, what's the motivation for somebody to join a gym, right? Are they trying to lose weight? Did their doctor say, hey, you're pre-diabetic and you need to get your A1C under control? Are they in pain all the time and they just want to be out of pain? Really, what is the problem that they are there to solve? And yeah, most people fall under one of those three buckets, right? There's variance between all of them, of course. And then every now and then you get that one person, at least in the personal training world, you get that one person who's like, I want to be the best at this sport or at this, this activity. And those ones are, while they're few and far between, those ones are really, really fun to train. But you got to get good at the other ones. If you're not good at giving people, that 10-pound weight loss they want to do before they go into their wedding, it's hard to build a business for yourself.
Got it. And when in your initial conversation with the client before you sign them the initial trainer, that's where you'd ask some of those questions, and so you'd send the person who wanted to fix pain to the FMS guy, maybe.
Exactly.
Tracking.
Exactly.
Okay.
That would help me decide like who the best fit is for them, because I want to set the trainers up for success. If I pair them up, if I pair somebody who, hey, they've had 2 slip discs and they just want to be able to walk without pain, or at least with less pain, and I give them to the guy that's a master at plyometrics, that's probably not going to mix very well, because that particular trainer is going to push them either in the wrong direction, or they're not going to be sensitive to their pain, or they're just going to be like, hey, pain is just part of the process. That's not what they were trying to fix. They were trying to fix the pain that's already there, and we need to bring it back and put them with the person that specializes in that.
How would you get to know your trainers?
Conversations. I would have one-on-one meetings with them every single week, about 30 minutes, but I spent a lot of time walking around and just having conversations with them, and picking their brains a little bit and allowing them to pick mine. And, if they were very studious and very, very interested in learning new things, by all means, come into the office. Let's set this up as a dedicated time. There's other people who just want to show up, say hi, and do their job. And that's cool too. But I want to get to know that. Like I want to go take them out to coffee. We would have team events every now and then, and I would do everything I could to at least have one conversation with every single one of my trainers every single day.
Did you ever have trainers train together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we encourage that highly. In fact, there was about once a week, we would have the training meetings, right, where we would get together and we would share new ideas or maybe go over some old ideas that can master them. But once a month, we would have them do a group workout.
Would you just, was that team building, or would you like introduce, do a burpee suicide thing for them to show them that tool? Go ahead.
Well, there were times where it's like, okay, I'm going to show you guys some programming styles here, where it's like, because I love plyometrics, right? Plyometrics became one of those things that I really wanted to master, and I saw a lot of transfer to lots of different sports. So sometimes I would take them through, okay, guys, I'm going to show you what a plyometric block for a workout is going to look like. put them through that, right? That's an education piece. Or I would say, hey, brand new trainer, write the workout for next week, and then give them a week to write the workout and give them a little exposure. Because the quicker I can get them to get that exposure and to get over their fear of programming, the better off they're going to be in the long run.
What do you mean exposure?
So
Give them exposure.
a lot of the new trainers, a lot of them didn't have a lot of experience programming. Like they would pull workouts from Google or
Got it. Yeah.
Pinterest or whatever. And over the course of the conversation, like, hey, that's one tool. You can use that, especially new. But I want you to get better at doing this on your own, being able to do this on the fly. Because if somebody walks in and you have a perfect program set up and, oh, I broke my leg over the weekend, well, now I guess we're not doing squats. Now what? Can you think quickly and change the program if needed? And so I wanted to get them exposure to that kind of stress, right? That kind of like being in front of a group, being in front of an individual who suddenly this person can't do that, or this person, has an injury, or this person has, they just don't want to do that today. It's like, what do you do? How do you have that conversation? And how do you change the program to still elicit the response and adaptation that you want in the long run, but give this person what they want and need in that moment?
Did was it kind of like Hooters where the personal trainers had to have a certain look to them to get hired? I'm serious. This is a serious question. I imagine that the most fit looking personal trainers got the most, I don't know, maybe not.
Trainers would fall into two camps, right? Where it's like, you get the ones that look like that, the ones that are just yoked. They look like a Dorito. It's just nothing but shoulders and a thin waist. And of course, no legs, because why would you train legs here in LA? And then you get the guys who are more of a dad bodish, right? But they're knowledgeable. Like I had a guy who had a PhD in kinesiology who he looked like a dad, because he was a dad. He had 2 kids, but the guy was smart, and he would get amazing results out of people. Just because he didn't look the part did not at all diminish his capabilities. And so when I would interview them, yes, look mattered when they walked in. Do you look professional? Do you look like somebody who works out, right? At least a little bit. Even if it's once a month, do you at least enjoy the process of working out? And then I'd look at, okay, what are your technical skills? What's your background? What's your education? What do you actually know? And in the interview, I would actually give them a task where it's just, okay, you have a client in front of you, a 65-year-old male. They got a torn labrum in their left shoulder. Their right knee's a little dodgy, and they've had a hip replacement. This is their first training session in 20 years. What do you do with them? And then give them 5 minutes to write me a workout. And really, that was it. I didn't have a standard to be like, okay, this is wrong, this is right, that kind of thing. It was more like, what's your thought process? How do you take the information I gave you and then put it onto a piece of paper and say, hey, this is what I want to try? And then I would quiz them like, okay, this person can't, they put goblet squat, right? That was a pretty common one, is goblet squat. Okay, this person with their torn labrum, that hurts. What would you do? And then make them work the problem.
Interesting. Did you ever make a wrong hiring decision where you hired somebody came in and can you go into one of those? Like one of those, oh man, I totally misjudged that guy or that person.
Yeah. So this was back when I was running RFT coaching in Salt Lake City. It was our second actual hire for a coach, and we had put the ad out, in various mediums. This guy had answered. He was coming in from Pennsylvania, so we did all the interviewing virtually because that was really the only option. And he was planning to come to Salt Lake. He was bringing his girlfriend and her daughter with him, and it's like, okay, great. This guy's he's former Navy, had been through BUDS, but he had some issues and was medically discharged. So okay, this guy, at least he stood on the footprints, raised his right hand, made a commitment. This is a veteran gym. Cool, let's give you a shot. And when this guy rolled up, he rolled up in a school bus that had been that he had emptied out and converted into basically a mobile home. In this school bus, it was him, his girlfriend, her daughter, a wolf dog, a Great Dane, and a fox, all living in this bus. As a coach, he was okay. He wasn't great. And a lot of the clients were just like, ugh, this guy, he's okay, but he's not great. And so we did a lot of training with him, but just not communicative, wasn't really interested in learning, had his mind set on certain things. And then one day a holiday came up and he said, hey, I'm going to go down to Moab for the holiday. I'm like, okay, great. Just let me know when you get back. It's a 3-day weekend. Enjoy. He took off. And then Tuesday rolls around. No coach at 6 a.m. So I text him like, hey man, you okay? And he, get a couple of responses back like, oh, the bus broke down, blah, blah. Like, okay, no worries. Don't worry about it. It's fine. A week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, 3 weeks goes by. Come to find out, he had taken a job down at a gym down in where he had gone to on this vacation. Didn't even bother telling me he wasn't coming back.
Oh man.
And I mean, it just went to show like, okay, just because somebody might be cut from a similar cloth that we are, doesn't necessarily mean that they're reliable. It also was a good lesson for me where nobody's going to care about my business as much as I do.
I want to take a break a little bit and jump into what you're talking about, plyometrics.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a great believer in plyometrics, so I'm interested to see. And I and I always when I think about it, I go back to some study. Of course, you can find a study that justifies everything, but this study took a look at very intense plyometric program versus just sprinting.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the assessment was, like a broad jump. And just short sprinting, had as much advance in the broad jump as a pretty fancy plyometric
Mm-hmm.
progression. And I took a look. I've read all the textbooks about plyometrics and starting out the progression for plyometrics. And I guess it's based primarily on, at least initially, on the number of jumps per session. And I took a look at how many jumps people do in a basketball game. So many more than you would do in one of these sessions. We did some messing around with depth jumps and
Mm-hmm.
I read books on from basketball coaches and how to improve jumping. And one guy's theory, he was very successful. Yeah, just get him, better at doing heavy deadlifts, and that's the best thing you can do for him. So I'm a plyometric skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
So change my mind. Convince me
Yeah.
otherwise. What have I missed?
So when I look at plyometrics, right? Of course, I go through the Soviet era stuff first, right? Because they were really the grandfathers of plyometrics and plyometric programming with their what was it called? God, I wrote it down. Where is it? There it is. Shock method. Shock method is what they referred to it as. When I started looking at it that way, instead of it being a jump, which is explosive in nature and muscular in nature, really, what's the point of plyometrics, right? So when I started digging into it a little bit more, come to find out, plyometrics aren't necessarily the jump; it's the catch, it's the drop, it's that eccentric loading, and then the connecting tissue being built up.
From the eccentric loading, right?
So, okay, well, physical therapists use this for ankle rehab, for lower limb rehab a lot, right? They do bound and sticks or step and stick. That's their first start, right? Well, I like that because, there's no such thing as, I mean, just because you have rehab doesn't mean we can't use those same movements for prehab too. So if I have an athlete, like for example, the rugby players, if I had to do this all over again, I would say, okay, we're gonna build up plyos in addition to the running, and we're gonna start with bound and sticks. So big jump, land on one leg, control it. Big jump, land on one leg, control it. Starting there. And then maybe we'll go into a bilateral drop off a box. Start small and then work our way up to about maybe 30 inches. Doesn't really need to be much higher than that. And then maybe we start throwing in things like a depth jump where you're dropping and then hopping onto a smaller object and then building that smaller object up till to the point where they're equal. And then maybe
What was the second one again? You just jump on a box and land soft, or was it? It's not a depth jump. There
no,
was a
it's just a drop. I call them box drops.
just step off a box.
Yep.
So what's
Yep.
the difference between that and a depth jump?
The depth jumps has the box on the other side. So you have to rebound off the floor and jump onto the next one.
Okay, sorry, just a semantics issue with me. Go ahead. Sorry.
Basically, yeah. So we progress up to the point where they are doing depth jumps, where they're dropping from one, landing up on another. And then maybe we had a hurdle in the middle there. So the idea here is their connective tissue is getting more and more springy. And so you don't have to use nearly as much muscular force to produce acceleration or to produce vertical jumps if you're doing vertical jumps. Most of this was in terms of acceleration. Really what I'm doing is I'm building up the body to have all this connective tissue that can handle the loads that I'm going to place on it. And so when I do load them up with that 500-pound back squat, their connective tissue can now handle it. The tendons are nice and strong against the bones. The muscles aren't, like, you're not going to rupture something. The likelihood of rupture goes down. And that's essentially how I've been using it. Is essentially injury prevention plus force production.
Your assessment?
Not really, no.
No assessment, then where's the proof, Chris?
I mean, the only proof I have is anecdotal in the sense that I had no lower limb, and I haven't had any lower limb injuries for any of my athletes since I started in.
What would be, I mean, how would you progress it other than difficulty? Would you progress reps or just difficulty of the exercises?
So reps could be progressed, difficulty could be progressed, as well as a plane of motion. So going in the frontal plane is much harder than the sagittal plane. Doing things transverse where you're doing a twist involved in the drop or the jump makes things much more complex. I actually was working with a guy who was in his 60s, a skier, and his changing direction was one of his big challenges. So I actually used used dot drills. So we just had one of those pads with 5 dots on it.
Oh yeah, we just I implemented the dot drill early on for my skiers. I bought all my initial gear from Bigger, Faster, Stronger down in Salt Lake. I remember I went there. I had to buy new racks, but they had a bunch of barbells they were throwing away.
Oh man,
they were like, "What's the matter with these things?"
Give them over.
I grabbed a bunch of them. Yeah. But I remember, that guy. I forget his name, but he, I think he invented the dot drill, and it was just a really simple, single double leg plyo exercise. Good conditioning tool too. Go ahead.
Amazing. So yeah, I would use that kind of stuff where it's like, okay, for the skier especially, we start with bilateral hopping to doing a frontal hop, then a 2 diagonal hops, and then another frontal plane hop, and then we would move to one leg, and then we would use 2 alternating legs between the dots, and then we would add a turn. So it's like you'd be turning 90 degrees to get to the next dot, and then we would do that single leg. And he got to the point where he was mastering these things pretty well. And his ski season was amazing after that. And like he was telling me, like, yeah, I did 12 runs, I didn't even feel tired. And this is a dude in his 60s.
Yeah, it was so interesting because I initially in my ski programming, we did quite a bit of that high hurdle hops. Hurdle hops, facing one direction, facing another, Z hops, we call it, with twists. I mean, we would load the depth jumps. We would load them high and low. Because these guys were jumping. And eventually I ended up cutting all that stuff out and just going to touch jump touch intervals for conditioning. It was really interesting to see. Tell me about your, because you're, if I remember right, you're an endurance athlete yourself.
Yep, cyclist. Got the
there,
bikes hanging in the back.
Was that, has it always been cycling, or did you do tries or ultra running or stuff too?
Yeah, I've done a couple tries. I do okay. The triathlons, my running is my weak suit in triathlons. And so I was never going to break higher than top 5 maybe, because most of those tri guys are coming in with 6-minute mile average paces, and I'm more of an 8-minute mile kind of guy. But
you take me back to your Army days, because you were EOD. I mean, you had to be a lot thicker, right? Were you much heavier?
No, I was really? 155.
Oh, really? Even in a big ass suit, you're 155?
Here's the thing: I never wore the suit other than in training.
Well, good for you.
So with who I was with, we were soft support. So basically, we were going in at night into these assaults on the assault team, guiding the assault team in, guiding them out. And yeah, I'm not carrying an 80-pound suit on my back just in case I might come across something. That's not happening.
No, good for you. Good for you. So tell me about your endurance. I'm really curious about your endurance programming now and how maybe that has evolved over the years, and the coaches that you relied on. And it's probably this, I'm sure it's the same for you. You kind of start doing other people's stuff, then you kind of put other people's stuff together and do it kind of mixed, and then you start doing your own stuff. So tell me about that journey for you from the endurance programming and where you are now with your own endurance programming.
Yeah, so when I first started, there were lots of books out there. I was a teenager when I first started getting really into this kind of stuff. And I didn't have money for a coach, back when I was 14, and my parents weren't going to pay it for me. So I had to figure it out on my own. So I bought, what was it? It was a Serious Cycling from Edmund Burke, which that book has actually been on my shelf forever. I've actually had to buy it twice now because I've worn it out. And that's a really old school, like 70s style training and racing. And then Joe Friel's stuff really, really helped quite a bit.
Yep, I'm familiar with him. Yeah.
And then I would pull things from different sources, right? So like magazines would sometimes have ideas, or maybe friends and other racers would have ideas. And there's a really good race director there in Utah when I was living out there. His name was Ed Chauner. And the guy was a former professional mountain bike racer, and I picked his brain as much as I possibly could. But back then, I didn't know about going easy. It was, hey, we're going hard, or I was going too hard, let's say.
Yeah, yeah.
I would be in zone 3 most of the time. Didn't even have a heart rate monitor back then. Be in zone 3 most of the time. Speed was the only thing I tracked, speed and time. Be like, if I did do intervals, it would be like hill climbs on the mountain bike. It was very loose, right? And I think as a teenager, that's probably the best way to go about it, because you learn to have fun, right? You're actually enjoying your time on the bike. Nothing will kill the fun more than something that's too regimented and just make you hate it. When I started getting more serious is when I moved over to the road when I turned 18. And that's when I started digging into the Joe Friel stuff a lot more and trying to understand the Edmund Burke stuff even at a deeper level. And that's when I started incorporating 10-minute intervals, 5-minute intervals, 1-minute intervals, things like that, because a road race acts like that. Whereas a mountain bike race is
Can I
not.
stop you just for a second? There is a technique to cycling and just learning how to spin.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, before we go back to strengthening to the programming on just the endurance programming, tell me about that journey for you? Because I don't understand it. It seems super narrow. I'm like, it just seems like spinning your leg, but there's a technique and
There
skill
is.
to learning how to spin. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So when I learned how to do it well, and I teach other people how to do it well, there's a couple different ways of learning it, right? The easiest method is to put you on an indoor trainer and then have you do single leg intervals. So when I did this back in the past, I would do, it would be hours. It'd be like 2 hours straight of 30 seconds right leg, 30 seconds left leg, 1 minute both legs. And I would just do that for hours. And on the mountain bike especially, it's very important to pedal circles. Because if you don't pedal circles and you put too much effort in the downstroke, your rear wheel has a higher likelihood of spinning out, especially if you're standing up. So
So circles, you mean you're pulling with the other leg?
yeah, but it's
Your
more,
your leg
it's,
pushes. Go ahead.
yeah, so it's mostly the pull and the push are the easy parts, right? It's the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock positions that end up being flat. So there are tools out there like Roval chain rings that are that elliptical shape that try to get rid of that dead spot. And that's one method to fix it, right? I don't like that method. I've used them. I really don't like them. It feels weird. Some people love them. But for me, it was all about, okay, what imagery do I need in my head to imagine pedaling in a perfect circle? And for me, 2 worked really well. First one, scraping dog poo off my shoe, right? How do you do that? Well, you push and then you pull. So okay, I can use that as a good imagery. And that started that journey. And then eventually it got to the point where it's like, okay, if I think more like a train, like an old school steam engine train where that arm is just doing this, I can put that image in my brain as I'm doing these intervals, these single leg intervals. And oh, look at that. I'm pedaling actually circles now. I'm not feeling any dead spots. The bike's not riding me anymore. I'm able to maintain power throughout the entire stroke. So that's where it ended up evolving to, was that imagery of that train in my head. And now circles are actually quite easy. The other method, and this is something that if you have a spin bike at home, like a Peloton, for example, you can do as well. Those are what's called fixed gear. So whether you stop pedaling or not, doesn't matter. Those pedals are still going to move. And that, and a lot of track racers with their fixed gear bikes do this, right? Because they cannot not pedal circles. They have to. And so they just get on those spin bike or those fixed gear bikes and get really used to, hey, I have to turn this over. I have to be able to do this. And you do it with single leg as well. And it won't allow you to do anything but circles. You have to continue those circles.
In the fixed gears, you can't stop.
No.
It's because the pedals keep going. Okay, right. I
Mm-hmm.
remember having like an old bike in fifth grade or something like that.
I'll be honest, the track racers, man, those are some ballsy human beings. Like those fixed gear bikes, they scare me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
They cheer you up if you right.
Yeah, you raise your hands in the air after winning and you stop pedaling, and pretty soon your face is gonna go meet that stem real quick.
Okay, go back to the programming we were talking about, Joe. No, I'm sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So I started out with those, more a little bit more zone 4. High intensity, long intervals. Back when I was younger, those worked pretty well. But that really, as I got a little older, I got a little smarter. And that's where like the Norwegian method is now a pretty popular thing, where it's, I think they use a 15-15 where it's 15 hard, 15 easy, and they alternate that. Last night, I actually had what I call a microburst session, which was 4 rounds of 10 reps each, which is 30 seconds in my case at 350 or more watts, and then 30 seconds at 145. And I just repeat that 10 times, multiply that by 4. And that's where things have evolved to now. So it's like the heart rate comes up to a certain level, about 165, and it never really drops, but the amount of muscular force required changes dramatically.
So you went from, I understand the application of power training for cycling, and I've done a little bit of programming on that. But I just read the Norwegian Method book, and my understanding, but I don't know, the guy really got into programming. He kind of talked about the founders of it, but just the volume that guys are putting in at the zone 2 is pretty phenomenal.
You
Getting
look at
back
Toddy.
to stuff we talked about base training, but go ahead.
Yeah, you look at like Tadej Pogacar, right? If you're familiar with that name, that guy, he's probably the best cyclist in the world right now. His zone 2 is 300 watts.
Yeah. So his ability to
just incredible.
Build up the power underneath that, his slow is really fast. What you're saying.
Exactly.
Right.
Like his easy pace is like my just sub VO2 max pace. It's absolutely incredible.
And that's the power of the zone 2 training.
I mean, that, those guys that are at the pro tour level, I mean, they're coming in with VO2 maxes just like Godzilla size VO2 maxes, right?
Like 80.
Yeah. If you don't have a VO2 of like 70 nowadays, forget it. You're probably not going to be a professional cyclist or even a professional soccer player in the European leagues. You've got to have a VO2 max way up there. But then that's only one metric, right? VO2 only is slightly predictive. It doesn't actually tell the whole story. And so you get guys with these monster VO2 maxes, but they're still not winning. And on paper, it should be like, okay, these guys should be the ones that are just absolutely schooling everybody. But in reality, it's not always the strongest person. It's usually the fastest person. And those two are not mutually exclusive. Like you can be the weakest guy in the field, but still be the fastest one based on positioning, based on technique, based on just being ballsy in the right times. There was a guy that I raced with over in Europe. His FTP, his functional training power, was just over 200, which for even a continental level pro team over in Europe, that's crazy low. But this guy could hide like nobody else I've ever met in my entire life. This guy would do almost no work during the races, and he'd be there in the finish every time. I mean, he wasn't winning most of the time, but he would be there at the finish. And it was just like, that just goes to show like your absolute FTP, your absolute VO2 max, none of that stuff really makes a huge difference if you have these other skills and you know where to hide and you know how to ride your bike.
And your own programming, do you base your zone 2 stuff on power or on heart rate?
So that, a little bit of both. So when I do an FTP test, I actually like to do a 2x8 minute FTP test with anywhere from 4 to 8 minutes in between, depending on the time of year and the fitness level. And then I take the average. And then from there, that gives me my FTP. And then my zone 2, I work back from there. So if my FTP is just above my zone 3, so into my zone 4, and I can say my max power as measured is around 1100 watts, that's great, right? I have a big wide range there in that zone 4, zone 5, and into the sprint. But then below that, I have to look at heart rate in addition to the power numbers to be able to say, okay, this is how much stress my body is seeing. Where if I'm at 200 watts and my body's at 145 beats per minute, I'm probably going a little too hard. I probably need to bring it back, because at the age of 43, if you take that 180 minus your age, that's a pretty accepted number for your zone 2.
Right.
And so for me, I peg mine right at 140, because I know my top end, my top heart rate is around 187. So I just put it at 140, keep it there, and as long as my heart rate stays below 140, I let the power float. So
because if you just pedal to the power based on your FTP, like you took 60% of your FTP or whatever your max power is, you could be that day, you could be at a really high heart rate, working really hard to maintain that power, because the heart rate is your actual exertion. Got it.
Exactly. And then my body's giving me a lot of warnings at that point, because it's like, hey, I'm probably overtrained if I'm turning out 180 watts and my heart rate's at 160. I probably should take the day off. Yeah. That's so. It's like I use it as they both weigh about the same. where it's like, okay, this is how much intensity I want, but this is my stress level.
So is your endurance programming philosophy now polar training, 80% zone 2, 20% other stuff? Or is it about like that? That's my understanding of the endurance polar training divide
Yeah.
in
And
general.
traditionally, an 80-20 split works perfectly. And I would say in the off season, it's about that way. I do use what's called sweet spot training. Have you heard about that one yet?
Yeah, entertain me
So
or
yes,
educate me. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So sweet spot, you take your FTP, and it's 84 to 97% of your FTP. Now what that does is it crosses the line between Z3 and Z4. Right. So that's where the sweet spot lies. So Z3 is a little too easy to get any kind of anaerobic benefits out of it, or real serious aerobic benefits out of it. And it's a little too hard to be zone 2 and to keep you from not destroying a bunch of muscle and having to recover from.
That's what I understand. That's what I understand it is that dead zone of Z3 is it's really not training it yet, but you can't train the next day because it's too hard to you can't recover. Okay, go ahead.
Exactly. It destroys muscle. Sweet spot has been the stuff that's been used now over the last several years across the European peloton and now here in the States. I actually learned about it by listening to Fast Talk Labs, which is another another podcast with some amazing guests that come on there, and they put it right at 84 to 97. Some people say 88 to 97. It really depends on who you talk to.
And this is of your FTP for
of
cycling
your
or go
of your
ahead.
FTP. Yeah.
Got it.
So, and you start small, right? You start in 5-minute blocks, and then you work up to the point where you can do that for about an hour. And then the way I've been using it is they were on that same podcast, they were talking about what's called staged intervals. So really, what's the point of an interval is to increase VO2 max, right? It's your ability to utilize that oxygen. So how do you get to a higher percentage of that VO2 max while still working in that sweet spot level? So what they proposed was we do staged. So I have every 5 minutes, I have a 30-second effort that's about 130, 140% of my FTP to bring that heart rate up into more of to just kind of shock the body a little bit and then drop back down to that sweet spot and maintain it. What I found is by doing it that way, and now I'm up to 15 minutes of doing those where it's 30 seconds hard, 4.5 minutes sweet spot. And I repeat that 3 times. Well, what I've found is that mimics a race pretty well because you're going to be in that sweet spot zone 3 place for races. But how do you manage the surges that happen? Because there's always constant surges. And playing with that up, down, where you're never actually recovering from that VO2 max effort, you're having to keep that hard effort still. That's been instrumental. Like that's changed the game.
And so the goal at the race is to be able to go longer at your sweet spot, or you make your sweet spot faster based on power rather than heart rate. Perfect.
Exactly.
All right. Define aerobic base for me. Come on.
Aerobic base. Oh boy. So for me, aerobic base would be the amount of time you can maintain your highest level of zone 2 power without your heart rate going over zone 2.
Hang on a sec. Highest time maintain zone 2 power. So this is and what is that based on? Your max power test or FTP test?
FTP.
And what percentage of FTP would it be?
From 75 to 83.
Got it. So 75 to 83. So highest time you can maintain zone 2 power without going over your zone 2 heart rate.
Yep. Because we've done these, I've seen these tests done on indoor trainers where they put people at their zone 2 and say, okay, we're going to say, like, let's use mine, for example, 181 watts. You're going to maintain 181 watts for as long as you can. If you drop below 170, the test is over. If you go above 200 for too long, the test is over. So you want to keep it a very tight range. And then you monitor their heart rate. The heart rate will eventually, as you fatigue, your heart rate will start creeping up. Yep. And your power will remain the same. So the second that heart rate crosses that Z2 into Z3, that's it. The test is over.
What is your standard?
90 minutes.
That seems like a low standard. Am I missing something? Because Frail is like 4 hours and some like 60 minutes. Go ahead.
And for European racers, absolutely 100%. Right? European racers, their races are anywhere from 3.5 to 6 hours long. You know, even the shorter kermesses, which are 100-kilometer races in Belgium, those are still 2 hours and 15 minutes. Those are long races. Here in the States, our races are maybe 50 minutes to an hour.
Got it.
But because we don't do a lot of road racing, we do a lot of criteriums, but not a lot of road racing. And so we don't need that monster capacity if you're staying in the States. If you do want to go to Europe, obviously you got to match what they do. And their training is wildly different than what we do here.
I mean, you'd have to be, I mean, what would a week take? How much zone two training would you need to do a week to be able to get to that? It'd be a lot.
When I was on a continental team, I was training 30 hours a week, and about 20 of those hours were spent doing zone two.
When you're doing your FTP test, are you on a trainer? Or you're outside.
I'm outside.
You're outside because you have power. It doesn't matter if the wind's blowing in your face.
Exactly. And sometimes I want those variables, right? Because like those variables, those are real. Like I'm going to see those things in real life. And so even if my FTP is a little bit lower than where maybe my actual true number is, that's okay, right? I can make adjustments based on the stress my body is seeing and what my heart rate's telling me. But that's, if I do it inside, yeah, it might be a little bit more exact, but it also I might trick myself to not go as hard as I should be going. Because when I'm outside, I'm not looking at my power meter. I'm just going and I'm waiting for the alarm to stop.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the alarm to say stop. That's all that's I pay attention to the clock. That's all I pay attention to. Whereas inside, if I'm using Zwift, for example, I've got all my data right there on the screen. I can see everything. And that's not what I want. There's something to be said about knowing what it feels like to go to the point you're bleeding out your eyeballs, right? If you don't know how to do that, you don't know what that feels like, you're probably not going to be able to do that in a race. And in races, I don't know about you, but I'm not checking my computer during a race very much. Like all I'm doing is checking the time and maybe my distance, but that's it.
So interesting. Do you so you get your when you convert to your rate or later in your off season before as you're starting to peak and increase your intensity going into the season, is that based on the weeks before your first race, or is that based on if you've met your standard for aerobic base?
No, it's based on weeks prior to the first race. So here in California, racing will start in January, February timeframe, so pretty early. In fact, we're about a third of the way through the season already. So my workup kind of starts in November, and that's
So
where
you're cutting back on your zone two. You're doing more intervals and tempo stuff.
Yeah, and after, because the season here ends around July, August, it's just the way things sit. Right now we just don't have a lot of race directors who are putting a lot of races out there past July. So I usually use that as my downtime because I do cyclocross as well. And cyclocross is by far my favorite discipline out of all of them, just because it's fun. But it's my workup for cyclocross is different than my road season. And so I give myself a good 3 or 4 weeks where I just go and enjoy it. I don't write programming for myself. I just go out, and if I feel like riding 2 hours, I'm going to go ride 2 hours. If I want to ride 5 hours, I'll go ride 5 hours and just actually enjoy being on the bike, doing it with friends, doing it with the team, and just enjoying it again. And then when cyclocross season starts to come up, all right, we're working on sprints again because you're sprinting out of every corner. You got to be able to get your cadence back up to pace after a slowdown into a corner. You've got to be able to pick the bike up and throw it on your shoulder and run. So running is getting thrown back into the mix. There's a lot of cyclocross is just such a wildly different discipline than all the others, and you have to have a lot of different skill sets that it actually makes that training a lot more fun. And then by the time cyclocross season is over, it's bleeding into the road season. And so my base fitness is usually already pretty good going into that first road race.
Maybe because the way your season works and you're pretty much in season all the time, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question for you about maintaining aerobic base. And I remember reading Frill, and he's like, hey, once you kind of get the fitness demand, you only need to train it half as often to maintain it. So as I understood that from his, if he was having his athletes train 20 hours aerobic base, during the base building period, when they start moving into, the build period, he would pull back and just have them do 10 hours. Has that been your experience? Have you practiced that yourself?
Yeah. So my, as the season progresses and I push for that peak, the amount of time I spend on the bike gets reduced and the amount of intensity goes up. So yeah, it is an inverse relationship like that, where it's just like as you get closer and closer and closer to that edge, you don't need as much long, slow distance rides. I still enjoy doing them, but I think that kind of dulls the edge a little bit, especially when the races are only an hour long. You don't need that 4-hour weekend ride. You need more like a 1.5-hour ride with some serious sprints in there to get what you want. And then for those LSD days, I use what's called a jumps, which is basically a 15-second sprint every 10 minutes. So yes, you're
Even on
doing it.
LSD.
So you are doing a lot of long, slow distance, but I still want to maintain that neuromuscular adaptation. I still want to encourage my body to still get like snap quickly when the needs happen. And so I use those jumps. And what that is basically it's a 50, you put the gear in the biggest gear you have. In my case, it's a 50 in the front and a 10 in the back. And I come almost to a complete stop. And then I'm jumping out of that. I got 15 seconds to try to get the cadence up to 100 or higher. And those are hard. Those are very hard. And you just do them every 10 minutes. And it keeps that capacity really high, keeps the entertainment high, especially if you're doing it with a friend, because now you're racing for something and you'll dig a lot deeper. But that's if I'm going to do long, slow distance when I'm getting closer and closer to that peak, that's what I'll do during those days, just to kind of maintain that intensity level.
Have you ever messed around with power training for non-cycling?
Mm-hmm.
Like I developed a power program for kettlebell snatches.
Interesting.
You can just base, or you can use power. It's pretty much just use as reps instead of the power meter. But you can do a percentage based on the reps over a certain time trial. Have you ever done anything messed around like that at all with power? I've always wanted to try to take and see if we could somehow develop a power calculator for work capacity efforts. So you could take an athlete. Let's say the work capacity effort is burpees to box jumps. Develop the amount of power in 5 minutes. An athlete does that for that, and then take them to a different mode, shuttle sprint repeats, and see if they demonstrate the same power over here. At one time, CrossFit had a power calculator, and there's so many things involved, right? So, if you weigh 150 and I weigh 170 and the box is 20 inches, I'm moving more mass. So the power for me to jump up higher, or if you're 5'8" and I'm 5'4" and we both are doing a power clean plus push press, your power is higher because it's higher to go. There's so many fucking variables. It's impossible to do, but I always thought if I could somehow develop a way to program work capacity, not based on time, but on power. Boy, I could do some interesting stuff with that. Have you?
Yeah,
I don't know if you. Go ahead.
Yeah, when you look at the equation to develop a training cycle like that, oh my gosh! I mean, what is that? Weight times distance divided by time.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of math going into it, and you'd have to know a lot of details about each individual athlete in order to make that work. Would it be interesting to test? Yeah, 100%. That would be an absolute interesting thing. I think as a coach though, in practice, that would be a giant pain in the ass just to try to get people to, put in the right numbers. And because, like weight changes every day. Like for example, yesterday I weighed 154 because I was a little inflamed from a heavy lifting day. Today I'm at 151. And so it's like since your weight changes day to day, moment to moment, hour to hour, you would have to weigh them in every single time before every single event.
What are you doing for your own lifting now?
So right now I started working for Ultimate Performance out here in Los Angeles as a regional business manager. So now I've got four gyms.
These are like personal training gyms, totally.
Yeah,
if I understand correctly.
Exclusive personal training gyms.
And they're expensive. How much is it a month?
So we go off of we do packages, right? So in this case, like 36 sessions. That would be about 3 months of training, and it would be $8,500.
So these are people who are serious about getting fit or they're going to spend a lot of money. Go ahead. Okay.
Exactly. So because I just started with them, I wanted to understand how they do things. And so they actually gave me a trainer, gave me a 36 session package, and we're 2/3 of the way through that. I gave her carte blanche because I was just like, I want to know how you do things. I want to feel what it feels like to be a client. I'm still going to race my bike. I'm still going to train on my bike. Make sure you work that into the program. But I want you to train me like if I was just somebody coming in for a transformation. And to her credit, I mean, I started at 165 pounds. I'm now down to 151, and it's been 2.5 months. And she's actually been doing an amazing job. And how they do things, it's a lot of hypertrophy. It's a lot of that stuff like that. But it's the accountability piece, I think, that really changes it. When I was working for Equinox, there wasn't as much accountability from individual to individual. Each
accountability? Explain that. Is she like calling you up and saying she yelling at you for being a pussy or something, or what? What does that look like? Go ahead.
But it's not quite that aggressive. But like with the Equinox, for example, you tell trainers, hey, make sure you're helping people with their nutrition. Make sure you're doing this. Make sure you're doing that. Because we all know that nutrition, if somebody wants to lose weight, nutrition is 80% of it, right? It's
Oh
a
yeah, yeah,
vast
or more.
majority or
Yeah,
more,
yeah.
yeah. Because anybody can give you a hard workout. I mean, you can Google a hard workout and go do that, but that's not really the magic, right? That's not where everything comes into play. It's that accountability, that other 23 hours of the day that they don't see you, and what are you doing during that time? So that's really, I think, where the biggest difference is that there's a lot more accountability here, where you put in your food, you're tracking your macros, you're doing all that stuff.
She's looking at that stuff. She's putting in. She's seeing.
Yep. And we're doing like skin fat caliper or skin pinch calipers for our body fat testing as opposed to an in body. So it's more accurate.
Did they give you the menu plan?
No. So they're very careful about that. Unless it's a registered dietitian, doing a menu or a meal plan is sketchy at best. But they did give me left and right limits to be like, okay, we want you to do this much protein. In my case, 160 grams of protein a day, which that's quite a bit. That's a 2 to 1, a little more than it's about 2.2 to 1 for grams per kilogram for me. Right. And then carbohydrates are more moderate, let's say 149 grams a day. And then fats are more moderate, like 80 grams a day. And then they can play with those. I've noticed that she doesn't typically play with the protein. The protein is pretty static. It's the carbohydrates and fats that we play with as far as energy development or energy availability.
Is she doing any testing when you first come in every day to kind of see where you're at, and like a tap test or anything like that?
Not every day, no. Sometimes every now and then, yes, but for the most part, it's like, okay, this is what the plan is. This is what we did, yeah, last time. Let's see what we can do. It's a much more linear style than what I think I learned from you and what I've used in the past. Because I've typically favored nonlinear versus linear style. It's a little more. This one, the way she's doing it is a little bit more linear.
Yeah, I think my programming is much more linear now than it was when you take the course.
Well, and it's interesting because that stuff adapts, right? And like the old stuff still works. It's not
Everything works, nothing works forever.
exact. You know how many times I've repeated that line? Literally thousands.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, take a look at what you're experiencing there at Equinox or at your Ultimate Performance now, and taking a look at. I mean, what have you learned that they're doing that you're like, man, this. I'm impressed.
So I think the thing that's impressed me the most is the education level that the people at Ultimate Performance are getting.
These are the trainers, the
Yeah,
personal trainers. Go ahead.
yeah. So I used to put trainers through educational things through Equinox, and they would send me PowerPoint decks like, "Hey, teach this," and I would go through it. I'm like, I don't like this content. This is why, and they would get to the reference page and it'd be like T Nation. I'm like, guys, you're gonna like, come on, like, give me real references here. If you're gonna like, don't give me a blog post as a reference. Like, let's dig a little bit more. And then these guys, I mean, they're using Poliquin's method. That's like a main staple for them. And Poliquin knows his stuff. And it's hard. And then the guy that's the head of global personal training, basically the guy that's in charge of the entire, because we have multiple gyms all over the world, he's in charge of the personal training program worldwide. He's an extremely knowledgeable human being. I would love to just sit with him for hours and just pick his brain on the things he's forgotten over the years. Not just the stuff that he knows now, but the stuff that he's forgotten because he's been in this industry for longer than I have been.
So interesting.
Yeah, and that level of education, I mean, you can't really beat it. I mean, the thing with Ultimate Performance is that their big thing is like you don't have to have a national certification to be a trainer with us. Like we'll take if you want to learn how to train, you want to train clients, come interview, show, and we're gonna put you through an actual interview. We're gonna put you through a workout because we want to see, do you actually work out? You know, and we want to see how you interact with your partner because we're gonna give you another person. We're gonna put somebody with you. Like, do you cue them? Can you build rapport with them right away? Like, how are you as an individual? And then there's a more formal interview process and things like that. But you're not even given any clients until you can pass our test.
And
And so
they have programming test or some type of okay, interesting.
both written and practical.
Wow, yeah. For my own coach hiring, uh, I kind of got away even from looking at resumes.
Mm-hmm.
First thing I do, I just send them a programming
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. And honestly, that's what we do too. It's like when somebody inquires about getting hired, like, hey, here's your client. What would you do?
Yeah,
We want to see what your thought process is.
right. So interesting. Tell me about. I only want to discuss this a little bit, but tonal.
Hmm.
What an interesting
That was a
kind
cool
of.
job.
I mean, yeah, because that was like COVID. I mean, that's the new thing of COVID. Is tonal still around? Or did they
They
get
are. Yep.
purchased by somebody? Okay, but tell me about tonal and kind of what your job was there, and I mean, just what an interesting job for a strength conditioning coach.
Right.
Tell me about that.
When I tell people about the jobs that I've had in this field, like that one's probably on my list of like, my favorite ones.
Wow.
And it's because it was so unique, right? It was such a fun, interesting role that was just wildly different than anything you'd ever see from strength and conditioning, just like you said. So my main role there was I was on set most of with the talent, the coaches, if you will. They were all certified, but they
So
weren't.
these are the models doing the exercises.
Exactly. And I would be in their ears saying, "Hey, flatten your back," or "Hey, make sure you give this cue," or all of those little things in their ear. And I would help them through the rehearsals where we would go through each and every movement. We would go, how do you cue this? How do you move? What's the best angle for the cameras? All of that stuff. They actually gave me a lot of leeway to help with designing new movements. So if you go on to the actual tonal itself, about 60% or so of those movements I helped create. I wrote the voiceover for it. I did all of that stuff. And some of them are crazy hard. We put a half Turkish get up in there, and like that one was on the nice to have list when I gave them a list of movements that we could do, and they're like, "Oh, we like this one." I'm like, "Oh man, now I actually have to figure out how to do this." And some of the biggest challenges with it is a cable machine, so your angle of pull changes based on where you are in relation to the machine, and so that was a very interesting problem to have to solve because gravity is not what you're fighting against anymore.
So for people who may not know what tonal is, I mean, it's a cable machine. You're looking at a screen,
Hmm.
right? And then you're doing the exercises that the person's doing on the screen. They're coaching you through it.
Exactly.
Okay,
And
go
the
ahead.
weight is done through electromagnets. And so it's more of like, don't think of it as weight, think of it as resistance. It's X amount of pounds of resistance. And they can do some really cool things on there. Things like they can do drop sets just by, stopping and holding it for a second. It'll drop weight and then you can keep going. You can throw chains on there. So it's a variable resistance. You can do eccentric where they overload the eccentric phase. Like you could do some really cool things with that machine. Things that I wish that we could do in real life with standard steel weights, but we just physically can't because it's impossible. But yeah, but one of the other cool things I got to do was I got to help teach their AI on what a good movement pattern looks like. And so I would get thousands of videos from these testers over in, I think it was Russia that they were doing the testing in. And I would have to rate them 1 through 5 on like one being an absolute crappy movement. This is why, you know, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 being perfect movement. And now they're actually just releasing this AI coaching program to help coach form. And so 3 years ago, I was on the ground floor with teaching this thing how to recognize good form, what angles the cameras need to be at in order to be able to judge it, and then how to do it. And now it's coming to fruition, which, that's, even though I'm no longer part of the company, they actually closed down the entire West Coast operation when they moved over to the East Coast, which is what got me laid off. But it was, it's cool to know that I was part of that and that these things that are coming out now are directly related to the work that I did at the very beginning.
Oh, so I mean, you really had to think about movement then.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, if you're putting words to it,
So,
so
when you're thinking
people,
like
yeah,
from a biomechanics standpoint, it's like I'm not a biomechanicist at all. I've learned what good angles are, but I've always looked at, okay, that looks like a good squat. You stand back and you kind of watch somebody move. You're like, okay, that actually looks good. Or, hey, that looks bad and your chest was falling a little forward. Let's correct that. But on a tonal or, having to do voiceover, you have to actually visualize these things and put it into words and know it's not just a cue, it's actually descriptive and it's really, really difficult. And so you have to get really good at understanding biomechanics, at least for like an average population to be able to do this. And of course, there's always going to be outliers. I mean, we had LeBron James as one of our advertising guys on our advertising stuff. That thing, they had to actually set the device an extra, I think it was 2 feet above where the standard installation was because
oh yeah.
he was so huge. So, that of course that's an outlier, right? That one gets thrown out the window when it comes to looking at the biomechanics of that. But for the most part, I think we did a really good job on it.
It's so interesting. I read this this book about Coach Saban when he's at Alabama, and he would just be walking around the hallway where all the recruits are coming in, and he would just make them squat for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he would take a athleticism over work ethic any day. He's like, he would take a lazy great athlete over a hardworking overachiever. And he said, I can teach hard work. I can't teach athleticism.
See, and I think the opposite,
that's unfair, right? For guys like me. Go ahead.
See, and I think the opposite is like, I can't teach quit. The idea of quitting is in the brain, right? If you're willing to quit when things get hard, that's hard to fix. Like that is a personality trait. That is extremely difficult to reverse. But I can teach you how to squat. If you're the person who doesn't quit and isn't gonna just say, hey, this is too hard, I'm gonna walk away. If you're somebody that's gonna have grit, I can teach you how to do anything.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you. I think mental fitness can be coached and trained, but I don't know. I don't know what the upper limit is for somebody who doesn't have any. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, and that opinion kind of comes from like my military side, right? When I went, so like for example, the unit that I was with EOD, you had to go through selection. Well, when you're going through selection, if you're doing an 18-mile ruck march and you have to complete it in 4 hours, and you're just kind of crying and whining about it the whole way, and your feet hurt, and you're willing to quit, then you're probably going to quit in combat too, and we can't have that. Like that's a personality thing. We have to get rid of that. We want the people who are going to do everything they can, even if they're running late, but they will show up on their hands and knees crawling across that finish line. I would rather take them than the person that cries and doesn't want to do it and just whines the whole time.
In working with all the athletes that you work with, I've only found one athlete who was a great athlete and was a hard-ass worker in the gym, where she would put everything. Generally, the better athletes aren't the best. They aren't the best in the gym.
I know. But if you can get them to be really good, not the best, but really good.
Oh, yeah. They can do so much more because they're so...
Oh, yeah. I mean, can you imagine somebody who is an amazing athlete who just has an insane work ethic, and just absolute grit? I mean, they would be basically unstoppable.
The only one I've read about is Jordan. Maybe Kobe, but Jordan's like that. God, we're almost at 2 hours. I gotta get you out of here. Thanks so much. Oh, I could go on forever. So awesome to talk to you. What an interesting career you've had. Jesus.
It's been good. It's for all the ups and downs and the thing, when one roadblock gets thrown up, say like when the gym was shutting down, that was such a hard time. But knowing like, hey, there's more to this. Like, it's not just, it doesn't end here. And keeping moving forward.
Do you miss working with athletes?
Yes, I do. I still run a side gig for endurance athletes. I do strength and conditioning through there too. That's a part that I'm always going to love doing. It's what got me into this industry. It's what I get excited about doing. It's what I nerd out on. And I'm my own test bunny. So anything that I make athletes do, I've probably already done myself. And, I love the process of it. I love having to think through the problem. And that's what made me a good EOD tech, was that I love it. It's a problem to fix. And how do I gotta fix the problem? Like, let's work it.
Yeah, it's so interesting that I'm a elaborate all the time right now. Right now, I'm testing. I'm 57, so I'm testing this idea of bipolar training, but with endurance and strength. There's zone 2 endurance and just max effort strength. And then I'm also testing. And then on the endurance side, I'm testing the ability of. We've done some research on this already, but the ability of a sled drag to increase uphill movement under load, because the movement patterns are fairly similar, and there's a lot of flat-ass places, and step-ups suck after you do them forever and ever. Sled drag's not that much more fun. Nobody's done as many. I did step-ups this morning. I did an assessment this morning, but just an interesting, like, wow, can I actually drag a sled for 2 hours? Yeah, probably can. I can do zone 2. I already tested it. You don't got to move very fast. The weight is it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's step up. So that was one of our other assessments that we would do. It would be a 60-minute step-up test. And with load for any of our people who wanted to go into the mountains and do cool stuff, right? And I would put a weight vest on them. It'd be a 45-pound weight vest. And after every 100 reps, it was either, I think it was 10 curls or 10 dips. And that way it just break it up, right? And you could keep count. And I mean, we were getting my record was 1,700 reps in an hour.
How big was your box?
That one was 20 inches.
Oh God, that is
I know.
fucking moving, man. You
It,
got, I mean, what's your
well, you just
VO2 max? It must be high.
up close to 60.
Good for you. Yeah, that is, yeah, that's moving. Good
Yeah.
for you.
I mean, the trick to that one is just kind of put your head down and just go into the dark place.
And that's a high box too.
Hmm.
At 20 inches. Good for you. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's finish these lightning round
Yeah,
questions, and we might have to do something else later. This has been awesome.
absolutely.
Most influential strength and conditioning books.
So I've got two of them. That shock method and plyometrics from Yuri Verkhoshan. I always get his last name wrong. Verkhoshansky. That one was really good. And then Conscious Coaching from Brett Bartholomew.
And is that a strength and conditioning book or coaching book?
It's a communications book. It's
Got it.
so when I look at strength and conditioning, I kind of think of, okay, it's great if I have these guys in my gym, but if I can't get them to do what I need them to do, then I can't elicit the response I need to be able to get. So I meld the two together where it's like, yeah, it's a strength. It's not a sets and reps. It's how do you get people to do what you need them to do to get the adaptation that you want.
Real interesting.
Yeah, I've been following Brett for a long time. In fact, I would consider him one of my mentors over the years. Even though I haven't worked directly with him in a gym capacity, he's one of the people that has put so much stuff out there, and I've actually been able to converse with. And he's somebody that's a wealth of knowledge.
Not familiar with him. I'll read the book. Influential strength and conditioning coaches. Obviously, he's one. Anybody else?
Yep. I mean, you're on my list, man.
No way.
Yeah, it's when I went up and took that course from you, in a lot of ways, I think that pointed my career in the direction that it ended up is now, because it encouraged me to think outside of the box and work the problem and not just accept what's written as being the gold standard. Like, take some risk, figure things out, work through it.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Yeah, so Joe Friel, Edmund Burke, and then a guy that actually was at the very beginning of my career. He and I were coaching side by side, but now he owns a place in Tampa, Florida, named Theo Asan. He owns Oak SPG, and he's been doing a lot of work with baseball catchers, MLB catchers, working on strength and mobility through extreme ranges of motion, especially in the ankles and hips, because those guys are in such low, like they have to be in that crouched position for extended periods of time.
Yeah, I actually have a guy in my athlete team played a lot of catcher, talking about his knee issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting. And low back, like you said. Most influential programming tools, I guess.
Oof.
Like plyometrics is one. Any
Mm-hmm.
kind of on that level. Go ahead.
I mean, when we're talking tools, I think heart rate monitors have changed the game, and I use that for both strength athletes as well as endurance athletes.
How do you use it for strength?
So if we're doing things like, I know based on the amount of reps that we're doing, we're looking at time under tension, right? So if we're doing a hypertrophy set, I'm expecting the set to last anywhere from 90 seconds to 2 minutes. If I'm doing a muscular endurance, I'm expecting to go over that 2-minute mark. If it's strength based, it's probably going to be less than 30 seconds. Well, I can now look at the heart rate data and say, okay, you went hard enough because your heart rate spiked after you set the weight down to 160 beats per minute. And in hypertrophy, that's a very common number, right? For me anyway. Everybody might be a little different like that. But when I look at my extended period of oxygen consumption, my heart rate is going to match that. And I know how hard I went now.
And so you're using that for loading.
Partly, yeah.
If they set it down and their heart rate is spiking, you're like, you need to add the weight.
We can go heavier, or we can go, or give me an extra rep, or something along those lines where it's just like, okay, we can go a little bit harder. Let's dig this thing a little bit more.
So that's interesting. I've never thought of using it for that one. I haven't experimented. I might have to. Finally got a heart rate monitor. Anything else?
Just the software that's out nowadays. So I use Training Peaks for all of my coaching nowadays. If you're familiar with that, they have another one. What is it called? They have another program in that same Train Heroic. That's what it's called. That one worked really well. True Coach is a good resource. Anything that allows you to put values into like lifts and logs it for you and puts it in graph form, I think is an amazingly good tool.
1 to 5 biggest programming mistakes.
Oh man. All right. So getting too complicated with design at the beginning, trying to get fancy with it, trying to solve every problem in one training session. Simple works. Another one this one's kind of I'm sure other people have done this and it worked just fine, but for me, I saw negative results. Using the conjugate program for women. For men, using the conjugate program, the worked great.
So by conjugate, are you talking Louis Simmons stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, when I put women in it, I actually saw negative strength gains. Like their maxes all went down. And so that actually set me down a rabbit hole of how do I train women better? Come to find out, women can actually do a higher percentage of their 1 rep max for more reps than men can.
Oh, wow, that's so interesting. I call that working strength. And I
Mm-hmm.
find that the higher your training age, the higher your working strength.
Mm-hmm.
So I could, with a higher training age, I remember I had the weightlifting guy for CrossFit Bergener. I forget to taste for now pronounce his last name, but his son came and trained with me, and his son was a prior National Olympic weightlifting champion. He could snatch like 225. I forget
Man,
what we did. We did like power clean and push press for so many reps at a certain weight, and it was a much less percentage of his max than it was of mine
mm-hmm.
because he's so much stronger. But I was right there with him on time. Like, that's so interesting. I haven't noticed that with women. I wonder if that's because women don't push themselves going to 1RM.
Oh, it could be. Could also, I think it has more to do with their pain threshold. Like they can
That's
accept
true.
more pain than men can. I
I
don't
don't
want
want
to
to
push a
train next to a
baby out.
woman. I know. Yeah, I know. I always try to avoid training with women. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you ever like that. I'd have women bring their husbands to the gym after the benefit. Like, oh, dude's never coming back, man.
My my wife and I, we would do, so that 10-minute get up test, she will smoke me on the 10-minute get up test. And not by a little bit, by a lot. Like we did one, so we were doing it with kettlebells rather than sandbags, just to because we were trying to standardize it and just doing running tests. And we were using a 53-pound kettlebell for the men and 35 for the women. She would get over 100 reps in 10 minutes, and I'm over here at like mid 70s, and I'm just like, I don't know how you're doing this. Like, and she's a little thing, she's only 115 pounds.
So yeah, it's not a. Yeah, yeah, there was a woman and I trained with. Her name was Betsy, and she was like maybe 105 pounds and 60-pound sandbag. Which is much higher percentage of her body weight than mine. But 80 for me. I was like, oh my god, it was
Yeah,
just yeah.
yeah.
You're right.
And I think the last mistake would be random programming. Thinking that randomization and muscle confusion was the best answer. And, I've learned over time, hey, you do random programming, you get random results.
Group athletes you most enjoyed working with?
The last recruit class I worked with in the fire department for LA County, that was probably one of the coolest things that I like, one of the best groups I ever worked with. That was so much fun because not only did I get to hang out with the guys, because guys that go into the fire department, police academy, all those places, they're similar to guys like me who joined the military, right? They
Yeah,
want to
yeah, yeah,
serve,
yeah.
they want to be part of it. And so being able to hang out with them and then speak to being somebody who isn't in the fire department, being an outside contractor, and them realizing, hey, there's some people out here that do some pretty cool things. And then I could bring in some ideas like that were team building that, and I could be a part of. Like I would go with them on their runs. Like I wasn't there, I didn't need to be there for their running because that was all done by the cadre. But I would show up anyway, and when people would start to drop out, I would actually coach them back into the group. Well, they have a minimum standard of a 42 VO2 max test, which they use the beep test for. And I want to say they had to get to 9.5 to pass the test. We had a guy that was in his late fees going through the academy, which would not recommend, but he was going through it. And he was the one that we're like, okay, yeah, he's probably not going to pass. And they had typically before that time had about a 20% attrition rate based on that test alone. Everybody passed, every last one
For
of them.
you.
And so it's like that was probably one of the coolest moments that like one of my proudest moments to get everybody to pass that. And then because I was leaving the coaching side of the fire department at that time, because my contract hadn't been renewed, I needed something full time, and then my wife had come down with cancer. The class actually banded together, and get pulled together about $2,000 so my wife and I could actually go spend a weekend together before her actual chemotherapy started. And they gave me a coin and everything like that, and that was just one of those in the heart kind of moments. You know what I mean?
Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. Awesome. The best total body lift.
Power clean, love that thing. It's complicated, it's hard. I know you hate it. I know it's not your favorite
Joe
lift.
Ken wrote a whole book just on the fucking how to do the power clean.
I know.
Like it's a big book. Go
And when
ahead.
I look, and my argument with the power clean is that this is a primary movement pattern. But other people will argue against it, right? People will say, hey, no, it's not. But then I come back with like, okay, how are you going to pick a bag of groceries up off the ground, or a small child who's coming at you? How are you going to pick them up and walk with them? You got to clean them up.
No, no. Yeah, I know. I agree. I just found it every time I try to coach athletes through it. at least 50% can never figure it out.
Oh, I know. I
or at
know.
least, or at least I, or at least I was a good enough coach to figure it. But it made me feel better than Joe Ken had to write a whole goddamn book about it. Like maybe it's not me.
Yeah, it's a hard lift. And I look at it as if I can teach somebody to do that, I could probably teach them to do a lot more complex things because their brain is starting to wrap around it. And it does take a lot of patience and time.
I found the hang power clean is much easier to teach
It is.
than the power clean. I guess just
And
kids, you gotta go ahead.
and that hip explosion, I mean, that's probably the most important part of the whole lift. So if you're learning how to do a triple extension and you're able to get that bar up to shoulder height, you're just not initiating the catch, that's fine. Getting it up to chest height is really what I care about the most.
Wow. Okay. Lower body, best lower body press.
Front squat. I love it. It's safe. If you fail, you can fail in front of you. The weight's going to be a little lighter.
Best lower body pull.
I love a traditional RDL and snatch grip, not the deadlift grip. I want the wide hand grip.
Oh, so you got to go deep, huh?
Yep. But I want it to be challenging. I want that posterior chain getting lit up.
I never tried one of those.
Yeah, it changes
Our
it.
hinge is pretty much RDL. Yeah.
Yeah, it changes it a lot.
I found that the nothing gets my butt hurting like walking lunges though. For whatever reason, I
Right.
consider walking lunge a friggin' lower body pull exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it does it, but I do. I figured it. It's a lower body pull in my exercise rubric. Go ahead.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've noticed like deep Pelican split squats. That'll get it. That'll get the glutes firing up pretty good too.
Yep, for sure. Yep. Uh, best upper body press.
Push press. Love it.
We're going to do a study here pretty quick. King of the upper body presses. I'm going to do push press, bench press, and maybe military press.
Mm-hmm.
We did this for King of exercises, and we'll probably do a 1RM for each assessment day. 3 groups. One group just do push presses. One group just do bench presses. One group just do military presses. And then at the end of the cycle, they all do 1RMs again.
Mm-hmm.
And see, you expect the guys to, see which has the most transfer. I'm with you on the push press, though. It's really functional, too. Upper body pull.
Standard old pull-up can never beat a pull-up. And it doesn't require much equipment. All you need is a bar or even a tree limb.
Most overrated exercise or lift.
Barbell snatch. I don't coach my athletes in snatches. Period. We do not do barbell snatches. And my argument has always been like, you will do nothing in the real world that looks like that. Nothing. And I've dislocated my shoulder doing snatches. So it's like there's the risk versus reward. If we really want to get overhead power, I can teach you how to do a push press or a push I don't need to go for a full snatch. I know there's a lot of USA weightlifting coaches out there that are going to just scream to high hell that I'm wrong. And that's cool. I found, just like you, if I have a room full of 20 people and I've got snatches on the list, maybe 2 of them are going to do it right. 4 of them are probably going to be risking some serious injury, and the rest are somewhere in between.
I'll tell you a funny snatch exercise. I was teaching I worked with a roller derby team in Jackson. That's pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I was teaching them snatches, and as I was teaching it, I smacked myself in the forehead. Don't do that. And then later in that session, somebody was putting down the snatch, and I was walking by, and they smacked me in the head with the barbell.
See, there's 2 examples right there.
I know, yeah. Most underrated exercise or lift.
Split squats. I think people don't do them enough.
Barbell or Bulgarian or lunge or dumbbell or what?
I've been using the dumbbell one a lot. Been using wrist wraps instead to be able to grip the heavier weights because my grip will fail long before that my legs will.
You can get heavy enough with dumbbells?
I'm pushing 118 for a deep Poliquin split squat with a 2-inch riser on both the front and the back.
So you've got a 100-pound dumbbell in each hand? 60. Okay, so yeah,
well,
that's
50.
You probably have dumbbells go up to 100 pounds in your gym.
We got dumbbells that go up to 136. Actually, and at UP at Ultimate Performance, they go up on 2-pound increments. So it's a much smaller jump.
Yeah, we used to do those with barbells, but you're just in a pretty vulnerable position if you can't come back up.
Yeah, exactly. And that would be a problem. I mean, I guess you could bail if you put your back knee on the ground. You could shrug it off, and the barbell isn't going to hit the legs as long as you have a normal size plate on there. But it's still pretty risky.
Yeah. Most overrated piece of exercise equipment.
The wall ball, single function piece of equipment.
Most underrated.
Sandbags. When I was training the Spartan racers, that was a go-to for big strength movements because nothing like things look like that. They don't look like a barbell. So when we start getting closer to race time, and I need their strength to be very tailored to a race event, I got to use a tool that's unusually shaped.
I just got one of them sandbags. You like it's like round. You like it looks like a one of them stones.
Yeah, those are
It's like
great.
150 pounds. So I lope 150 pounds. I was not fucking remember the thing.
Learning how to
I like had to take weight down to get 100 pounds. I get to my I'm like just get it here.
and learning how to pick that up is hard, without
It's
without throwing
great.
your back out. It's
It's amazing.
there's a technique to it. And I mean that when I was coaching my female racer who went on to the World Championship, she was doing that World's Toughest Mudder, which is that 1 mile event, right? And part of that one was you had to pick up a rock and lift it up and over a bar and drop it, and then do it back and forth. Well, that sandbag was a perfect tool for that. And I could load it up. I could start with a little bit lighter and then progress it up to a point where she was overloaded, where that what she was going to be lifting on competition day was actually going to be 30% lighter than what she was doing in training. And it made it so much easier for her.
Yeah, I don't know anybody. We continue to use a lot of sandbag work, especially for our chassis integrity work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how heavy an 80-pound sandbag is, or a 60.
Yeah.
It's a much heavier than an 80-pound barbell. Favorite mode for work capacity?
I like multi-mode. Even being an endurance guy, I like to mix things up a little bit. To this day, one of my favorite ones still comes from CrossFit.
Multi-mode CrossFit.
Yeah. So, Cindy, the 5 pull-ups, 10 push-ups, 15 squats, it's such a balanced work capacity style workout that you're never overloading one system, and you can just keep it going. I love that one for testing 20-minute work capacity.
I don't know. I want to call it a theory, but we have a way of training body weight stuff. I actually had a bunch of these. We had a partnership with North Face, and they were doing anyway. I had a bunch of these personal trainers come, and I had to develop a programming progression that was all body weight stuff because they were working with body weight stuff. And one of the things I put together, I call it body weight flow. For example, here just one, and we would do it based on time. And 20 minutes thing is pretty incredible. It's like a example would be like you want to do very many reps, like 5 squats, 5 squat jumps, 5 broad jumps, and then right into 3 push-ups, 3 hand release push-ups, 3 clapping push-ups, and then right into 2 pull-ups, 2 chin-ups, 2 mixed grip pull-ups, and then just roll around like that. And it was just, yeah, it's pretty amazing. I remember doing Cindy one time in a CrossFit gym, just getting my fucking hands ripped up.
Oh yeah.
Just from the pull-ups. Oh my God.
Yeah, I used to tell people tape your hands before that workout. Tape your hands. If you're going for like higher than 16 rounds, you got to tape your hands up because you're gonna just rip them apart.
Yeah, good for you on Cindy. Yeah, that is pretty simple and it blows you. Advice to your 18-year-old self. So this is like prior military and everything.
Yeah, if I had to give myself advice at that age, I'd be like, look, enjoy the ride. You're gonna get to do a lot of cool stuff. You're gonna meet some really cool people, and you're gonna learn a lot. So keep the brain open. Learn everything that you can, but try to enjoy it because there's so many cool things you're gonna see.
Have you found that you didn't enjoy it at times? You didn't appreciate it?
Yeah, I think so. I think my time in the Marine Corps, I didn't enjoy my time in the Marine Corps nearly as much as I probably could have. Because I was so hyper focused on I was married a little too young at that time, and so I was more focused on that and racing my bike rather than actually being in the Marine Corps and enjoying that. Where, I ended up racing for a continental professional team, which is great, and that was another experience that I would never want to trade for the world. But, I wished I had enjoyed my Marine Corps time a little bit more.
Chris, thanks for your time. Thanks for this morning. So great to catch up with you. And what an incredibly interesting career.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you invited me on here. It's such an honor to be invited by somebody I consider a mentor and, to come onto their podcast and actually speak with them.
Well, I've learned so much from you today. I got to try some of this. I got to go back and reconsider plyos. I don't know if I'll come your way, but I'll open my mind back up. And definitely, you taught me some stuff about I really like the idea of that your 6-mile reassessment for your obstacle course racers as a way to do that. So I'm moving more and more into endurance programming for whatever reason.
Hey, if you need any help, let me know. I'll be more than happy to share what I've got.
Well, we're trying to develop an aerobic base assessment that is simple and repeatable. And right now we're looking at like a 60-minute run,
Hmm.
and based on, got to run in your zone, and it's based on distance.
Hmm.
And some kind of measure of aerobic base that will have to be tied to age.
Hmm.
So there's a way we could standardize it. I have no idea how we do that. We have to get lots of data, but go ahead.
Yeah. Other than a VO2 max, yeah. Are you looking for metrics other than that?
What I'm really looking at is no, we just use 180 minus your age to get the heart rate you have to run at. But the idea of when you have aerobic base,
Okay.
when is it? Because right now, have you read John? You the uphill athlete guys, Johnston and House. They do
Yeah,
on
I
the
haven't read that
mountaineering
one.
side. House is like a climber, and Johnston is the coach, and they do work with mountaineers. But they have one that is, I forget, but it uses your lactate as comparison to your VO2 max and how close they are, or something. I forget what it is. And there's been a couple others, but we're trying to get one that is quite not as doesn't need as much, get a lactate. We're gonna do some work with lactate threshold stuff. I'm sure you've done
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
but I'm interested to see first if we can find an assessment. I'm interested to see if there's assessment, if your assessment should be different, or your performance on assessment based on the duration of the event or the distance of the event, and then on the bigger level, if it's even worth working in zone 2 training for tactical athletes because they never have the training time to develop base based on what I hear from these coaches. So, I mean, in my programming for base fitness for tactical athletes, at most I can train endurance 3 days a week.
Yeah.
I mean, can you
I would
go ahead?
I would suggest looking into the sweet spot.
I think that's interesting.
Because you can use that other outside, like not just on the bike, but in other modes as well. So I would highly encourage you look at the sweet spot training, see what's being done, see what kind of responses that can elicit, and that's probably where I would start.
Yeah, I think that might be because I remember, Pharrell saying, like the zone. Maybe he was talking about the sweet spot. He says that's the best. You just can't recover from it. So, but that's interesting. I'll look into that.
Yeah, I do sweet spot training once a week right now. During my off season or build up to my on season, it's twice a week.
Learning me. Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.